Good morning. That was kind of loud from up here. I don't know if you can hear us out there. You seem so far away. But welcome to our first IFC meeting in our new building. I'm really happy with this complex. I hope you guys are having this footprint in Southern Nevada. Committee Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Senator Canizaro,
Here.
Senator Goycochea,
Here.
Senator Harris,
Here.
Senator Neal,
Here.
Senator Nguyen, Senator Sivos O'Gara,
Here.
Senator Titus,
Here.
Vice Chair Dondero Loop,
Here.
Assemblywoman Anderson, Assemblywoman Backus,
Present.
Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod for Assemblywoman Peters,
Sorry. Here.
Assemblyman Carter for Assemblywoman Brown May, Assemblywoman Dickman,
Here.
Assemblywoman Garlow,
Here.
Assemblyman Hafen,
Here.
Assemblyman Hibbets for Assemblywoman Kasama,
Here.
Assemblywoman Howdigi,
Here.
Assemblywoman Mosca,
Here.
Assemblyman O'Neill,
Here.
Assemblyman Watts,
Here.
Assemblyman Yeager,
Here.
Chairman Monroe Moreno.
And I am here. Will you please mark Senator Nguyen present when she arrives? Good morning to everyone here. We will have two opportunities for public comment, one at the start of today's meeting, another at the end of the meeting. We ask that each speaker keep their comments to 2 minutes. If you'd like to dial in for public comment today, the number is 888-475-4499. And then the meeting ID number for the day is 869-0753-1191. And then please press pound. If you are joining us here in person, I ask that you either mute or turn off all of your electronic devices. That includes the team. And please do not think that our members are not paying attention. They're following through with documents on their electronic devices, but they are paying attention as this meeting goes through. I hope to be out by 3 o'clock. That's the goal. And we'll see if that happens. So we're not here until midnight. So we will start with the first opportunity for public comment. If you are here in Las Vegas, I ask that you fill in the chairs at the table here in Las Vegas. If you'd like to do public comment and you're in Carson City, please fill in those chairs in Carson City. We'll start here in Las Vegas and then we will go to Carson City. Remember to state your name and spell your name for the record, and comments to 2 minutes. Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to provide public comment today. My name is Tara Raines, T-A-R-A-R-A-I-N-E-S, and I am the Deputy Director of the Children's Advocacy Alliance, CAA. CAA is a nonpartisan, independent nonprofit. We aim to cultivate public policy that allows every child in Nevada to thrive. To do this work, we bring together coalitions to both assess the needs of Nevada's children and families and develop innovative and sustainable solutions. Specifically, we have convened a Children's Mental Health Action Coalition. This group of providers, parents, MCO representatives, faculty, and community members have worked together since 2023 to develop a list of policy priorities. Among them are increasing professionals to support children's mental health, specifically professionals along the education continuum, including bachelor's level professionals, and retraining or micro-credentialing opportunities for professionals who are currently serving our kids. We recognize that substance use disorder is plaguing our community and is often intertwined with other mental health disorders. We also know that youth need to be supported in healing from trauma and reducing symptoms of depression, anxiety, and other mental health disorders to improve their chances of living lives without being dependent on substances such as opioids. We know that prevention and early intervention strategies offered by trained professionals can support youth to reduce the likelihood of the development of substance use disorders. We are overjoyed to see that Director Whitley, Deputy Director Litz, and their team have been responsive to the needs of Nevada's children. Item M includes grants and awards to a number of our partners that will not only grow the number of highly qualified child mental health professionals, such as the UNLV Awards, but will also improve the training of existing workforces that serve children, such as the Boys and Girls Club Award. We are emphatically supportive of these awards and hope this is the beginning of an intentional and strategic statewide investment in children's mental health. Thank you for your time. We are grateful for your commitment to improving Nevada's community by investing in children.
Thank you. Not seeing anyone else here in Las Vegas for public comment. Is there anyone at the table in Carson City? And I'll ask the members up there. Okay, seeing shaking of heads. No. With that, we will end our first, well, do we have anyone joining us online? DPS, do we have anyone joining us online for public comment?
Thank you, Chair Monroe Moreno. To provide public comment, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 241, you are unmuted. Please proceed.
Hello, my name is Shaninda Pettis. My husband is currently incarcerated at High Desert State Prison. I have also submitted a letter through public comments. However, the issues that are arising this year within the prison are worse than they have ever been since my husband has been incarcerated. It is very inhumane to have them locked in a cell with no AC, and due to what occurred in Ely, now my husband is now being let out for not being let out until 5 to 6 days at a time. Not to mention, when we call up there, most of us get very disrespectful communication from the COs answering the phone. A lot of changes need to be made, and I hope that a solution comes quickly from this meeting as our loved ones are suffering. My main concern is my husband's safety, and I urge everyone to consider solutions that can help our loved ones quickly because they are all suffering within this prison. Thank you.
Thank you. Next caller.
Chair, there are no additional callers for public comment at this time.
Thank you. And we will have another opportunity for public comment at the end of today's meeting. So moving on with our agenda, the next item is the approval of our December 13th, 2023 minutes. Members, you should have had those minutes emailed to you for review. Are there any questions, comments, or corrections with the minutes? Seeing none, I ask for approval.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion to approve, a second. Any discussion on the motion? Not seeing any. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask our fiscal analyst, Ms. Kaufman, to identify items that will be pulled from items list F, G, H, L, M, and Q.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Sarah Kaufman, Legislative Counsel Bureau Fiscal Analysis Division. I will begin with list F. So on list F, item 3 is being requested to be pulled. Moving on to list G, both items 1 and 2 are recommended to be pulled and heard together. Those are Department of Indigent Defense on both of those. Moving on to list H, I would note that item 3, the Department of Health and Human Services, Aging and Disability Services Division, has been withdrawn. So that will not be considered today. On the second page of list H, item 8 will be heard with items M 46, 47, 48, and 50. I would note that on item H9, there was a revision that was requested after the agenda was posted. The requested transfer amount is requested to be revised from $49,978 to $71,177. There are no recommended items on pages 3 or 4 of list H. Moving on to list L, there are no items recommended to be pulled. Moving on to list M, there are no items recommended to be pulled on page 1. On page 2, item 9, the Office of the State Treasurer is recommended to be pulled, as well as item 10, which is also the Office of Treasurer, unclaimed properties. Those are recommended to be heard together. On page 3 of list M, item 12 is recommended to be pulled. Department of Administration, the Administrative Services Division. There are no items recommended to be pulled on pages 4 or 5. On page 6, item 28 is recommended to be heard with items M42 and M81. I would note on page 7, item 37 is recommended, or it has been withdrawn. And then on page 8, item 42 again will be heard with items M28 and M81. On page 9, items 46 for the Department of Health and Human Services, Division of Healthcare Finance, will be heard with items 47, also the Department of Health and Human Services, Division of Healthcare Finance Policy, and 48, which is also the Department of Health and Human Services, Division of Healthcare Finance Policy, and item 50. So those are 46, 47, 48, and 50 will all be heard together for the Division of Healthcare Finance and Policy. There are no items recommended for pages 11 or 12. There are also no items recommended on page 13 and 14. On page 15, item 77, there was a revision that was requested after the agenda was posted. The additional amount provided for the Department of Employment, Training, and Rehabilitation was requested to be revised from $602,947 to $779,000. So that is just a revision. On page 16, items 80 is recommended to be pulled in conjunction, and that will be heard with items I, K, and M89, excuse me. So items I, K, 80, and 89 will be heard together. And I would note that there was a revision that was provided last night for item 80, and that would be to revise the amount from $2,175,000 to $894,374. Item 81, the Department of Corrections Director's Office is again recommended to be heard with items M28 and M42. On page 17, again, item 89 is recommended to be heard with items I, K, 80, and 89. Page 18, there are no items recommended to be considered. And on page 19, there is also no items recommended to be considered. On page 20, item 108, the Department of Wildlife has been requested to be pulled. And there are no items for pages 21, 22. On page 23, item 122 is recommended to be heard with items G1 and G2. And I would note on item 125, there was a revision that was requested after the agenda was posted to change the amount transferred for the Public Utilities Commission of Nevada from $521,770 to $522,589. And there are no additional items recommended to be pulled on page 24. Moving on to informational items, there were no items recommended to be pulled from this list. And Madam Chair, I'd be happy to restate any of those.
Any questions? Does anyone need the list repeated? All right, members, are there any items that are not currently pulled that you would like to have pulled for further discussion today? Not seeing anyone here in Vegas. Is there anyone in Carson City that would like to have anything pulled?
Sounds like a no.
Thank you so much. Seeing none, then I will accept a motion to approve all items that had not been pulled in the list from Ms. Kaufman.
So moved, Madam Chair.
Second.
Just clarification, Madam Chair?
Go ahead.
Just, we're moving to approve all items that haven't been pulled, but do we need to state that with the adjusted amounts? Thank you.
Yes.
Madam Chair, then I would correct my motion that I would move to amend as revised.
Second.
And we have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Not seeing any. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. Thank you so much. Moving on to item D on our agenda is a statement of the IFC contingency account balance. And I will ask Ms. Kaufman to go over the revised contingency account balance statement. And members, you do have that statement in your packet.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A revised statement was provided to the committee members, and so that should be on the dais for the members. It has also been posted on Nellis for item D. There were several requests for restricted IFC contingencies that totaled $1.3 million. So the beginning balance of the restricted IFC is $156,377,783. With these requests, if they are all approved, there would be a total of $155,066,604 in the restricted general fund highway fund account. There are no requests for the unrestricted highway fund, which totals $1,184,685. And there are no requests for the unrestricted general fund. And the amount currently in that balance is $12,946,146. Madam Chair, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kaufman. Members, any questions on the statement of balance? All right, not seeing any. I thank you so much, Ms. Kaufman, for that. Item E was withdrawn, so we will move on to list F and F3. That is the Department of Motor Vehicles.
Good morning, Chair and committee members. Sean Sever from the Nevada DMV. It is good to see you all. I have with me Vicki Call, who is our language access plan subject matter expert who put together our plan. So the DMV is requesting funding from the IFC due to the passing of AB 480 of the 82nd legislative session. And it's to help implement our language access plan, which includes a position to help coordinate it. In 2022, the DMV conducted a study of language services provided to the limited English proficient individuals, and we realized we had gaps in meeting the needs of those we served. We developed our first language access plan and identified the funding requirements to best meet those needs, which included the hiring of an FTE to coordinate the program. This person would have many duties, including coordinating ongoing training with our employees and how to use our language access plan resources, developing a cultural competency training program, working with our IT to establish a system to record LAPs served by our agency, their preferred language and their literacy level for reporting purposes, conducting outreach and training with our many partners, including AAA, our county assessors, and many community-based organizations that we work with, soliciting public comment and revising our plan biennially, augmenting our Title VI compliance program, and then coordinating our ADA requirements and complaints and issues. So this year, the DMV has revised our language access plan, and with funding approval, we would be able to hire a LAP coordinator to help our LAP customers now in offices where we conduct almost 5 million transactions a year. So we realize we're a bit cutting edge in asking for a position, but we don't want to assign it to somebody who already has a full plate and doesn't give it the full focus that it needs. We are taking this seriously and don't want it to become other duties as assigned. And we will build this position into our future budgets. And we can answer any questions you have at this point. Thanks.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I think we have a few questions. We're going to start with Senator Harris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Sever, if you could, and you spoke to some of this, but if we could get an overview of the language access plan, and then after that, if you could speak a little bit more specifically about the contract management analyst position, why it's needed in order to support the plan in current and future years. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair and Senator Harris. Vicki Call for the record. The position for a management analyst is critical for our change management at DMV. This position would be setting up the framework and strategies for DMV's culture change in communicating with our LEPs. In the past, we had a culture of allowing family, friends, whomever that would come in to our office with our constituents, our customers, and help provide any kind of communication gap if we had a language barrier. With the passing of the bill, that would preclude us from having that. So this position would help change our culture throughout the entire state in communicating better with our LEPs by changing how we deal with those individuals.
And Madam Chair, if I may, if you could also just give me a summary, an overview of what's in the language access plan.
Absolutely. Vicky Call for the record. So the language access plan would identify our opportunity to create a third party to help augment our conversations through telephone conversations in service, in office, by providing I guess if you will, a transition from not being able to communicate with them and having their friends come in. The language access plan would communicate to our staff throughout the state how we could better use the IVR, which is corporate plan management. You have third-party good of the state contracts that allow us to pick up the phone, call, and have a third party engage in that conversation to help bridge that gap with the individual. There are a lot of times we don't have Arabic-speaking bilingual employees, and so this is critical for us to change the path and the culture in which we communicate with our staff or with our customers in office as well as over the phone. So it's not just in the office additional efforts, it's also through the numerous communications that we have with our constituents via the phone, what have you else.
All right, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Members, any other questions? All right, not seeing any here. Are there any questions for the DMV in Carson City?
No questions
Not
up
seeing
here.
any? Thank you. Not seeing any, then I will accept a motion to approve.
Madam Chair, I'd move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion from Assemblywoman Backus, a second from Senator Dondero Loop. Any discussion on the motion? Not seeing any. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. Thank you so much for being with us today. And that's it for list F. Moving on to list G, we will hear items 1 and 2 along with M 122. It's the Indigent Defense Services. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair. Marcy Reba, for the record, RYBA, and I serve as the Executive Director for the Department of Indigent Defense Services. We are here today for 3 separate requests. Is it okay if I describe all together, or would you like me to take them separately?
You can describe them all together. That's fine, and we'll go through the questions.
Thank you. We are here today for 3 requests. First is G1, where we're requesting an appropriation of $2,827,002 from Assembly Bill 518 to fund the reimbursement of counties for costs in excess of their maximum county contributions. This year, of our rural counties, all counties except Esmeralda hit their maximum contribution because of the positive changes that they're making for indigent defense services. Item G2 is requesting an appropriation of $686,103 from Assembly Bill 518, and this is for continued costs of the Department of Indigent Defense Services for compliance with the Davis consent judgment, specifically in the areas of training, data collection, and oversight, as specifically required by the consent judgment. And finally, we're requesting authority in M22 to transfer authority from personnel to operating so that the Nevada State Public Defender may contract with an attorney in White Pine County. This is steps that the Nevada State Public Defender is taking towards compliance with the workload requirements that are in the area. The State Public Defender has had issues filling the positions with the salaried employee and is now taking steps to enter into a contract with an individual to cover approximate equivalent of 1.3 attorneys. This does leave a shortfall of about 750 hours under the workload that still need to be continued to be covered. And the state public defender is still attempting to hire a position, but again, they've received no qualified applicants, even though they've applied for or had the application out for over a year. But we have left sufficient authority in personnel that they can continue to try and fill that position. So we are available for any questions.
Thank you so much. As you can imagine, we do have a few questions, and I will start with Senator Canizaro.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I want to talk first just about some of these costs because it does reflect a pretty substantial increase. I think 115.9% when compared to our reimbursements for FY23. So can you talk to us just about what factors are contributing to those increased costs to the counties for the provision of the indigent defense services, and whether or not you as an agency anticipate further increases for FY25?
Thank you. Through the chair to Senator Canizaro. When this legislature created the Department of Indigent Defense Services, they put into motion some very positive change for indigent defense services and ensuring that our state is protecting those Sixth Amendment rights of those individuals that are facing charges. When we entered into the stipulated consent judgment, there were little changes that were achieved small bits at a time. One example is pay parity between prosecutors and defense attorneys. No matter which side of the aisle you're on, you should be making the same thing, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that these scales of justice are fair. So counties have been stepping up and increasing their pay for many of their public defenders so that it is in parity with their prosecutors. We've also seen an increase in the hourly rate for appointed indigent defense attorneys in our rural communities. Historically, the rate, which has not been increased since 2003, was $100 per hour. In this last legislative session, this legislature gave the Board on Indigent Defense Services the authority to increase that rate to an appropriate amount. And what they chose to do is to match the federal CJA panel. So that's if you're an appointed attorney in federal courts, you're paid a certain rate, which at this point in time is $172 an hour. So there is a substantial increase so that we could be competitive with what the federal courts were paying for their public defenders. Another substantial increase is that we were required to undergo a workload study. This Rural Nevada Indigent Defense Services weighted caseload study took a little bit longer than anticipated because of COVID and getting that data that we needed. But ultimately, when it came out last November, it said that we need 90 full-time equivalent attorneys across rural Nevada. And at the time that that report was concluded, we had about 60. So this means that we had to increase our attorneys in our rural communities by about a third. And the increase in cost is because our rural communities are really stepping up to the plate and they're making big change. For example, I'd like to highlight Churchill County. Churchill County has startup costs that you're seeing in these reimbursement requests because they created a public defender where they have 5 additional positions that they need to fill. They're having an investigator that they've never had before and sufficient staff that they're attempting to hire. They also have an alternate public defender with 1 staff member that they're attempting to hire for a staff attorney and a contractor. We've also seen significant change in Carson City, where Carson City historically was with the Nevada State Public Defender, but with staffing issues and an inability to fill our state positions, Carson City took on that additional role to create a public defender's office on their own full cloth. So they created a state public or a county public defender's office. They also had startup costs. They increased the rate of pay for their public defenders so it matched what their district attorneys were making, and that was the first time ever that the public defenders and district attorneys were basically making the same amount. So we're seeing these startup costs with our rural counties complying with these workloads. And I think it's been described as almost a choose your own adventure. All of our rural counties are very unique and they all have their own needs and they know best how to comply with this workload. So they tell us in their annual report as to what their expected costs are. And there's 3 possible ways you can provide these indigent defense services. It could be through contracts, and we're seeing an increased rate in contracts because the hourly rate went up, so they have to remain competitive. We're seeing an increased amount of the need of contracts. For example, in Nye County, they historically had 6, but they're going to need to increase it to 12 contracts. The other way that you can provide representation is through a county office. So like we've described, Carson City, Churchill County, they've had startup costs this year of buying computers, desks, other things that are needed for public defenders to do their jobs. And then finally, we do have some counties continuing the use of the Nevada State Public Defender, and that's where we have White Pine County at this point in time. So it's almost this structure that was put in place by the consent agreement as well as the legislature in certain things that needed to be completed. And we're really seeing a lot of change this year because we need to be compliant with that workload by November 1st to comply with the consent judgment.
And thank you for sort of walking us through some of those things. Obviously, I think to the extent that you're talking about startup costs, hopefully those are costs that we won't see, I would assume, year over year. So those are sort of upfront now, and maybe we won't be seeing those in this next fiscal year or for the startup cost piece.
To answer that question, the counties that are intending to do a county public defender's office like Churchill and Carson did that this fiscal year, so that's where it's expected. We do have other counties that are using those contract attorneys, and they're experimenting whether this is actually working or not. So we may see startup of extra offices in the next fiscal year, but they wouldn't be for Churchill and Carson because those were for this year.
And I hope that there is at least some thought then given to what counties might be considering that and trying to get some idea of whether or not we would see those sort of startup costs so that we can get a better idea of what it is we need to allocate, so that we're not always in a position of seeing these very increased costs for then things that are coming down the pipeline. And I know some of this is like we're trying to figure out what works and we're trying to meet certain criteria, and I know it can be a struggle to try to get attorneys out into some of our rural communities, and I know there's work being done on that front. But I'm hopeful that as we move into the next budgeting cycle and into this FY that into this fiscal year that we can start to see some leveling of that. With respect to just whether or not you anticipate further increases in FY25, I know you talked a lot about the factors and whether they're doing PD offices versus contracts and startup costs and so on and so forth, increasing those reimbursement rates for the contracts or the hourly rates for the contracts. But do you anticipate that we would be seeing additional increases in this particular fiscal year as well?
Good morning, Peter Handy, Deputy Director with the department. So yes, we are expecting those additional costs in this fiscal year 25, and that is because we have different counties that are going to be taking up those startup costs. So they're going to need additional contractors in Nye County especially. We're having attorneys come in to cover more cases. Eventually, we're going to expect those to level off or be predictably only increasing by marginal amounts. The increase in the hourly rate from $100 to $172 an hour put a significant difference in this year's amounts paid versus last year's. We're expecting that that's only going to increase by whatever inflation is or a maximum of 5%. So that's going to be predictable value going forward. As we get better data to identify what the workloads are in each of the counties and see how those adjust over time, we'll be able to much more accurately project how much is going to be needed in future fiscal years. I think the estimate right now for fiscal year 25 was in the neighborhood of $8.4 million. And that does include significant cost increases in those counties where we haven't done startup costs already. So we've already paid significant amounts to Churchill and Carson City. We're expecting to pay significant amounts in things like Nye County and perhaps other counties that we haven't expected. Humboldt County, Lyon County's always expensive due to the increased need after the workloads publication and the implementation.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I want to just clarify one thing because I may have misheard what you mentioned with respect to the 5% of the cost of inflation. Is that for the county? That's the county's share of what they are required in their maximum contribution to provide.
Peter Handy. So there's two things. One, yes, that's true. But when I was talking, I meant the rate of that hourly rate, that 172 an hour, that CJA panel rate. There's a cap to the amount that can increase year over year. So that will be limited in the future by that 5% cap or inflation, whichever is greater, or whichever is less, sorry. And yes, the same applies for the maximum contribution. So we're going to see how much the maximum contribution changes. That's fairly predictable. It's up to that 5% cap. And using that, we'll be able to basically subtract that from what we anticipate costs to be in the future, which again, that hourly rate's going to also be capped at that 5% year over year. If that makes sense.
But that will automatically, yes, it does. And I thought that you had said hourly rate, but then that also is a similar evaluation that we do for the contributions for the counties. Is that, and that's an automatic increase every year?
For the hourly
For
rate,
those
it's not.
rates?
It's going to be whatever CJA publishes each year. So when they do their evaluation, sometimes it increases. It typically does, but it's usually not beyond a couple of percent, historically at least. Sometimes if there's a huge amount of inflation over the year, then it does increase substantially, but it doesn't exceed that 5%.
So you're just still tagging it then to that CJA rate?
Yes, that's correct. For now, unless the board changes it for some reason.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit about some of the items under G2. And so can you talk to us and provide an update on the oversight of county indigent defense providers by the contract attorneys?
Peter Handy again for the record. Yes, so we have 3 attorneys who have been contracted with to perform these oversight services. Each of them have decades of experience. Combined, I think they have almost a century of legal criminal practice experience. One of them is a former special public defender from Clark County. He's covering counties in the South. All 15 rural counties have been visited by our contract oversight personnel since they began working in February or March, depending on when they began. They visited with the judges, they visited the courthouses, they visited jails, they visited public defenders' offices. They're really trying to make inroads into getting to know each of these counties on an individual level, getting to know the attorneys on an individual basis, really evaluating what the needs are in each of the counties, what concerns might arise in each of the counties. Some concerns have already been raised and some of them have already been remedied. For example, in Eureka County, there's an issue with having defendants in the jails. They can't be housed there because there is no jail in Eureka County, so they're being brought to White Pine. For a while, they weren't being brought to court for some proceedings. Our oversight personnel, our person went out, talked to the judges, talked to the attorneys, talked to the sheriffs, and they've worked out getting the inmate defendants from the White Pine County Jail to the Eureka County Courthouse for proceedings. So that's an example of something that's been remedied really in the short period of time that we've seen. We're working with the attorneys and oversight personnel in kind of a multi-pronged approach. So we're reviewing some of the data we're getting in our legal server system, taking that data, providing it to our oversight personnel so they can work with the attorneys to reduce backlogs in their case management software, to try and close cases that have been open for too long, to ensure that we're getting the best data we can, and to ensure that the work that they're doing is actually being reflected in the data that we collect. Please let me know if you have any other questions about the oversight, more specifics. Be happy to answer them.
Yes, sort of related to the same thing. Can you talk to us just about what expenditures would be ongoing in the next biennium, including the use of those 3 contract attorney positions to provide the oversight? Because I think that's one thing that we're seeing now, this additional contract attorney position that's doing that oversight as opposed to just like a position within the department.
Thank you. Marcy Reba for the record. The ongoing costs will be the administrative assistant. That's a new position. That's a salaried position. We are expecting to fill that on Monday, as well as continued contract attorneys. And like Peter said, we were really careful in the attorneys that we contracted with. We really wanted to have well-respected attorneys that could go into these rural communities and be accepted by the judges, the prosecutors, as well as the defense attorneys, and really have them open up. And the salaries that we have in our current salary schedule wouldn't have allowed us to be able to hire those individuals. And most of these individuals are retired from state service or county service anyway, so we wouldn't have been able to hire them. And we need to have that experience. So we would like to continue to have those contract attorneys as well as the salaried administrative assistant and that healthy travel budget, so we can make sure that as our court monitor requires, that these individuals are actually sitting in court watching what's going on and seeing it real time, so that we can start addressing issues that are easy to resolve or be aware of long-term issues that we need to take longer to resolve. Also, we're hoping to continue our request for training. We have multiple ways that we've provided training to comply with the consent judgment. Every year, we provide an annual training, and this past year, we were able to reimburse the travel of those rural attorneys through a grant, which that grant has now been exhausted, so we are asking for funding to be able to reimburse our rural attorneys. As many of these individuals are contractors to come to our training that have to pay out of their own pocket, and we want to do anything we can do to try and encourage them to come. So we've fought to get grants to reimburse them, but like we said, that grant is exhausted. We're hoping to bring in nationally accepted trainers and their travel expenses for the training this year. This past year, we brought in a Fourth Amendment expert from Wisconsin. We've brought in other individuals from across the nation that are really experienced. And just to give you an idea, our last training was on driving under the influence, because when we looked at our data and we looked at what charge is most commonly filed in our rural communities, driving under the influence charge was the first one at the top. So we wanted to make sure that we really focused in. We brought in those nationally accepted experts for training, and we let our rural attorneys, we also invited to anyone that provides indigent defense services anywhere in the state to attend this training for free. Of course, we need to have funding for the event space, the equipment, and a conference manager so that we can make sure that this goes smoothly. And the other positive idea that we requested was funding so that we could send attorneys to those nationally accepted trainers. We were able to send attorneys to a writing skills class in Nevada. There was another course. There were several courses that we're able to send attorneys to, and I think the one that got the most positive response was a trial academy in Salt Lake City, where we were able to send 5 rural attorneys, and we got back attorneys saying that was the best training that they've ever been to, and that they'll do anything they can to try and ensure that this funding is there moving forward, and that they would send every employee that they get to that training. So we're hoping to have continued funding so that we can send our rural attorneys to those trial academies. And then finally, the data collection and reporting requirements. We use Legal Server as our data collection system, so there are continued costs in, increase of the cost of the Legal Server. We are asking for a vouchering module to be added this year, and that vouchering module allows our attorneys to submit their billing online. This is similar to the process if you take those federal public defender cases, the CJA panel cases, you have to submit your billing online. That helps us to ensure that the data is input into our system and that the data is accurate, and it allows us to process these billings much more quickly, so we're hoping that that can be supported. And we also are hoping to continue to provide Westlaw Edge. That's the legal research database to all of our indigent defense providers. And as we know, this is commonly provided to our prosecutors in the district attorney offices. So we want to make sure that our public defenders are on that same field and have that ability to do online research, because the online research is much faster than many of them driving to a law library to look these items up. So those are the continued funding for oversight, training, and compliance with data reporting.
Okay. Can you talk to us a little bit about, with respect to the White Pine pieces of this on M122, can you talk to us about how the reduction in funding for personnel will limit the agency's ability to fill its state positions?
Thank you. Marcy Reba for the record. In M22, we are requesting authority to transfer $309,600 from Category 1 to Category 4 so that the department and the state public defender can take steps to comply with the Rural Indigent Defense Services caseload. When we had that caseload completed, the weighted caseload actually requires 3.3 full-time equivalent attorneys in White Pine County, which amounts to 4,595 hours of attorney coverage. Right now, the state public defender has one full-time equivalent attorney that's based in that White Pine County office, so that provides 1,392.6 hours of work. We have two additional attorneys that provide support for appellate and parole violation support for White Pine County, but they're not actually based in White Pine County. They do travel to White Pine County when coverage is needed, but it is a hardship for State Public Defender Patty Cafferata to have to drive from Carson City to Ely, sometimes twice a week, to provide coverage. So we're looking for other ways to be able to comply with this workload. We've posted this position, or the State Public Defender has posted the position, and like we've said, we've received no qualified applicants, even though it's been posted for over a year. So at that point, we decided to turn to the possibility of contracting with a staff attorney to assist. So we reached out to a local attorney in White Pine County to see if she'd be able to take on this workload. And she agreed, since she's a private attorney, she agreed that she'd be willing to work up to $1,800 for the state of Nevada to help the state public defender with this workload. So when we add up all of these attorneys, that does leave a shortage of about 742.9 attorney hours in White Pine County. In our funding request, there is sufficient funding for the state public defender to try to continue to hire. We've left funding there for one deputy public defender, but again, we haven't received any applicants. We don't know if we're going to be able to fill that. And we are exploring whether we can contract with a second attorney to cover the remainder of that time. Ideas that we've had are, because juvenile courts are on Fridays, we could contract with one attorney just to cover the juvenile court load. And possibly an attorney in Elko to cover this court load, because juveniles are held in Elko County. So we are exploring all of these things, but as you know, the cost of a contract attorney is significantly higher than the cost of a staff attorney. And with the state public defender not receiving the appropriations from Carson City and Story County because they've decided to provide their own public defender services through a county office, the state public defender is trying to be creative in how to comply with this, and we are working with the finance office to try to find possible solutions, but we believe that we'll be able to get there by November 1st, especially if we're possibly able to contract or fill that position.
Peter Handy, for the record, just briefly, I think the answer to your question specifically is the authority remains. We have plenty of authority in the 1499 budget account. There's just a revenue shortfall because we're not collecting revenues from Carson City and Story County like we previously did in that budget account. So there's plenty of authority to continue to hire to meet the hiring needs. It's just a matter of refilling the bucket once it actually runs out. And there are, like Marcy said, we're working with GFO and ASD going forward to figure out how to get that bucket filled so that it zero balances by the end of the fiscal year.
Yeah. And that makes sense. I would anticipate as we continue to see maybe additional counties take up their own offices, that there would be also like a reduction in what we're seeing in terms of contract attorney positions for each of those counties, considering that they're hiring their staff attorneys. So we'll just kind of, I think, probably keep an eye on that. And then I think you sort of answered my question for how you're going to try to address that additional need. I know that deadline for November is coming quickly, and I know it's tough. And so obviously we'll be keeping an eye on that to make sure that to the extent we can be compliant with those workload standards, that happens by November. Madam Chair, I don't think at this point I have any additional questions. So thank you so much for the time and indulgence.
Thank you so much. Speaker Yeager.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And first, I want to say thank you. I received the booklet that you prepared that talked about the work that your agency's been doing. I appreciated getting that. I know you probably don't always get feedback on those type of things, but I did read that and was just happy to see that things were progressing in such a positive manner. So wanted to say thank you for that. My question was a little bit on, we have the list of the maximum contributions under AB 518 for various counties, and then the projected total expenses. And I think all of the counties, with the exception of Esmeralda, the total projected expenses are higher. The amounts depend obviously on the size of the county, but I guess the question was, I was looking at Elko, for instance, and their maximum contribution was around $2 million. Their projected is about 3.8, so that's a pretty big difference of 1.7. Lyon County has a pretty big difference. And the question was, are you able to tell us, are there specific cases, for instance, capital cases that are happening in those jurisdictions that are driving up the projected total expenses? Or is this really just the aggregate across all of the cases? If you're able to kind of give any insight to there, just trying to get to the driver of what is driving those particular higher expenses, and whether it's a case or two that are taking a lot of effort, or whether it's spread over all the cases.
Thank you. Marcy Reba for the record. So there are some death penalty cases in Elko County, and there was one in Lyon County, but I wouldn't say that it's a case or two that's really driving this focus. I think what's driving this is that we're finally putting a spotlight on indigent defense, and we're looking at what the need is. We're talking with the counties about what the need is. We're seeing what the shortfall is, and the counties are stepping up and addressing it. So Lyon County historically had 3 contractors that would share cases and cover. One would be in Fernley, one would be in Urington, and one would be in Dayton. And then they would cover that representation. And that was a huge workload for 3 attorneys to be doing. Under our current program, they have 3 separate firm contracts where they have to have 3 attorneys each. So those 3 contracts increases that to 9. And they also have a juvenile specific contract for an additional 1. And they have a couple contracts for conflict attorneys. So right there, we've increased from 3 attorneys to 12 attorneys providing representation throughout Lyon County. So that's why we're seeing that large increase there. In Elko County is struggling just like our rural Nevada State Public Defender is. The Elko County Public Defender is unable to staff his office. I believe that he's about at half staff at this point in time. And when he's having individuals come in, they're either going to the urban counties, which are paying significantly higher more, or they're not staying in those rural communities. And this is resulting in the Elko County Public Defender conflicting off historically about 50 cases a month. So 50 cases a month is a lot of cases, and our department is working to find appointed counsel to be able to come in and cover those cases. There are a few attorneys in Elko County that are taking those cases, but many of them feel like the workload is too high, so they haven't been able to continue to take it. And our attorneys in our urban areas have really stepped up, and they've been willing to travel to our rural communities to provide that representation. So we are seeing higher expenses because those urban attorneys are having to come and travel to Elko County. We are continuing to work with Elko to encourage them to enter into conflict contracts with local counsel. We're trying to find possible solutions of how they could fill their public defender's office, but we haven't quite seen what their plan is in how to comply. But I think the great increase that we're seeing as Elko is because of the inability to staff their public defender's office and that requirement of bringing our urban attorneys from those areas into our rural attorneys to make sure that these individuals are properly represented.
Senator Neal?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just had a quick question. So you were talking a little bit about the training issues and needs. I'm just curious, what are you mentioned the Writing Academy, but what are really the training gaps that are occurring with the contract attorneys that you're bringing on? What are the skills that they don't have that you're having to ramp up on?
Peter Handy for the record. Thank you for the question. So It varies greatly because a lot of these attorneys who take these appointments or take these contracts have a variety of backgrounds. Some of them have only worked by themselves in an office. Some of them have worked in public defender offices. So it really depends on the individual attorneys. The ones that have a lot of institutional training bring a lot of that institutional knowledge with them into their practice in these rural areas. For the ones that have only had their shingle out there, sometimes they don't have that breadth of practice, and they maybe don't have, they've never encountered a particular kind of case. So we're trying to meet gaps all over. So we're trying to kind of build in those things that you normally get. Maybe you do a rotation in a public defender's office for 6 months or a year doing DUI and traffic cases, or maybe you do a rotation doing drug cases. So we're trying to build up that substantive knowledge of things that they might not see as frequently in these rural areas based on what they've only seen in their limited practice in those places. So those gaps, like I said, they vary. They're not easy to identify, but when we do see them, or if we see them on larger scales, then we're definitely bringing those up in future training. So things that we brought up in the past have been things like legal writing, appeals, how to work with post-conviction counsel and their cases should they be brought up on ineffective assistance claims, things like that, as to really improve their practice for their clients.
So thank you for that. Just a quick follow-up. So I wanted to ask about the listserv that you brought up. I was looking at the data that's on the website where you guys have a lot of, some of your caseload is a lot of appeals, but in your motions, it's really your motions report. You don't have appeals in a category there, but yet it takes up a lot of weight in your caseload. So does the listserv allow you to put the appeals into the data system?
Peter Handy for the record again. Yes, so that would be a separate case type when they're entering the appeal itself. So there's a checkbox basically when they're going through these cases as to whether they filed a motion to suppress, and they can include time for whatever it is they're working on in a particular case, in a particular matter. If they're conducting an appeal, it takes on a totally separate case file. We treat that as a separate matter for them to handle. So there aren't as many appeals, not nearly as many as there are open trial level cases. And a lot of those are being handled right now by the State Public Defender's Office. Some attorneys tend to have a few more than others based on the type of practices they do. But if you're not seeing a lot of jury trials, you're not seeing too many appeals coming from these counties. But as for the data reporting, they will be their own instance of a new case in the line if you're going through the quarterly data. It won't be attached to an existing trial level case.
And Senator Neal, if I could just add one item. So we are specifically required by the Davis consent judgment to track how many motions in limine, right? Motions to suppress are filed. So that's why that is completely pulled out. So it's how many motions to suppress are filed, how many motions to suppress are litigated, and how many cases go to trial. Those are specific data factors that we're supposed to pull out of our trial level cases. An appeal is a case type. So there's different types of legal problem codes for different case types, and those have been given a weight of how much time should be spent on the whole case. So an appeal is given a certain weight, and then you have your different levels of, felonies versus misdemeanors versus probation violations having a different weight. So a motion to suppress would happen within, a trial level case. So that's why it's tracked as to whether it went to trial and whether it was a motion to suppress. So those are one is a legal problem code, and the other is kind of an action that took place within a case, if that clarifies it.
It does. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Members, any other questions? Not seeing any. Then I'll accept a motion to approve item G1, G2, and M122.
Madam Chair, so moved.
Second.
We have a motion from Assemblywoman Bacchus, a second from Senator Don Darrell Loop. Any discussion on the motion? Not seeing any. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
That takes us to list H on our agenda, and we will go to H8, and we'll hear that with M46, M47, M48, and M50. It's the Department of Health and Human Resources, the Division of Healthcare Financing and Policy. Good morning.
Good morning. I got the short chair. Sorry. Okay. All right. Good morning, Madam Chair, committee members. Stacy Weeks for the record, Division of Healthcare Financing and Policy. I'm here to present H8 and M46, 47, 48, and 50 this morning. M8 or H8 is a request to transfer $229,980,587 in the Nevada Medicaid account from fiscal year 2024 to fiscal year 2025 pursuant to Section 36 of Senate Bill 511 of the 82nd legislative session. This relates to items M47 and 48, and just wanted to make a few comments and then obviously open up for questions. I just wanted to recognize that that we are currently, this $229 million represents a percentage of our total surplus for the state fiscal year 2024. We are under our budget by about 5.25%. Just a reminder, our total spend and total budget that we were legislatively approved was $6.5 billion. And so this represents about 5% of that budget that we are under projected at this point or have not spent. There are a few factors that came into play, two of which I think we had knowledge of. There were a couple others that were unexpected this last state fiscal year. One of them was the Change Healthcare cyber attack. It prevented us from February through July of making full payments to many of our providers. It impacted, it was a national thing that happened, and it really impacted especially our personal care service providers. We had to make advance payments. There were some questions about whether or not we could do that. So we spent the first 6 to 8 months working with CMS to make sure we were able to advance as much as we could to these providers, but we have not fully, until recently, come back online with Change Healthcare, which was our clearinghouse for these providers. So we weren't able to get their claims. And we have to go through that a certain provider or system to clear those claims under federal law to make sure that there is electronic verification for that visit in the home. This had an impact, we think, that we still have not seen come through, which payments, if we had been able to pay regularly and do that $25 rate increase that you passed last session, we probably are looking at about $15 million that we could have spent this last fiscal year that we are still trying to process today. So that money will be spent, and that liability will come out of the next state fiscal year, or today we are in state fiscal year 2025. But we are working on that now and doing our best to support these providers and their cash flow issues. The other thing that happened, surprisingly, it's good news, right? We had a higher amount of rebate collection that we got from our rebate and our pharmaceutical rebate account, 3245. A lot of this has to do with the increase in federal drug in just drug spending generally in Medicaid. This continues to be a huge cost driver in our budget. Obviously, the nice thing is that we do get these federal rebates. We also get supplemental rebates for fee-for-service and managed care on that side. But the big portion of the increase here right now that we're seeing, about $90 million that we did not project, comes from federal rebates. And that's because federal spend our drugs on that side have gone up about 5%. And the inflation has gone up 4.9%. So when we look at rebates, we did not know that when we closed our books with you all during session. And so that increase, that $90 million, is an increase in what we had projected. The other thing I wanted to mention that we saw happen this last year in our managed care program, I think it goes back to the unwind. For those of you that may not remember, we have to go through what we call the unwind process from COVID. We are renewing and redetermining eligibility for Medicaid members. We have not been doing that during COVID for 3 years. So our membership and our roles, what we call our caseload, has been inflated. We've had a lot of members on there not utilizing services, and we were not allowed to kick them off or even check their eligibility because that was the agreement we had with the federal government during the public health emergency to draw down that 6% FMAP. Remember that 6% increased federal share that we got? We had to follow those rules. We started that process in April of last year when the federal government said, please go forth. We had a delay, unfortunately. We worked some issues out with CMS, but we were about 6 months delayed in really getting going with Unwind. So our capitation payments in our managed care program and what we expected to see in utilization did not occur. We expected as people got removed from the rolls, we would see a different increase in costs and more utilization of the members still remaining. So what we're seeing in our managed care program right now is that we had more managed care plans giving back payments and back to us for the medical loss ratio of about $20 million. So that piece there was not expected. I think if we probably had done the Unwind and had be done or done today, we'd have a different scenario here today for you. So that's money we did not expect that we would not spend in this state fiscal year. The other piece I wanted to note is that there is this issue that continues to be, I think, a challenge for any Medicaid program, especially ours with a biennial legislature, is that it takes us 6 to 9 months after you guys pass the bill, and sometimes a year, to implement something. And then on our end, we really can't see the true impact because claims come in from providers 6 months after sometimes. So when we implement a huge provider rate increase, which was amazing last session, we did not see that impact, and we are still not seeing that impact. We had a huge delay in our federal review approval process. We submitted a pretty big record. I think Kentucky might have beat us, but we submitted over 25 state plan amendments after session. That's huge for our state. That means that we were making huge investments and changes to our Medicaid program, but that process is still going today. Like, we just started getting the rate increases going, and we have to recycle claims all the way back to January 1. We expect that all of those pieces that we're still working on is about $50 million. So hopefully the goal is that money will be spent. We'll just have to shift to a different state fiscal year because we were unable to meet the January deadline for many of the bills that you guys passed and approved. The other thing I would just note is in our managed care program, we started a year ago. We have what we call a quality withhold on the managed care, about 1.5%. They have to perform on certain what we call PIPs, but it's really performance improvement plans. And if they meet their metrics, they get that money back. If they don't meet their metrics, we keep the money. At this point, we estimate that everyone met their metrics, so that's good news. And we have money that we have our contractually obligated to spend on those MCOs. We also did what we called a bonus incentive payment program this last year, for 2023. And 2024. And these are both focused on really driving increased primary care spending. So if we saw managed care plans increase their spend on primary care as a total of their total spend, we would give them a bonus payment. And all the plans came to the table. So I always joke we have a carrot and stick, and the carrots are working right now, so I'm happy with my carrots. But that total is $30 million that is in state fiscal year 2024 that we have not been able to get out the door because we just finalized calculations on both of these programs. So the challenge on our end often is that we are just trying to get everything done within the 12 months. But that one and the length of time it takes us is going to continue to be, I think, a challenge for us to always be exactly on the dollar for our budget. And before I end, all of those amounts together up to about $205 million. So that's how much when we look at the surplus, which was about $245 million, we're transferring $229. We want to be careful we have something, because we're still closing our books, as you guys know, at the end of this month. So we want to make sure we have a little cushion in case there's anything missing. But at this point, we are looking at, we know about $200 million or more of that is liability that we're going to have to spend in 2025 that we should have been able to spend in 2024. So with that, I'll stand for questions. I apologize. That was a really long-winded introduction. Thank you.
No need to apologize. We appreciate the information. We do have a few questions for you. We're going to start with Senator Dondero.
Thank you very much. And thank you for that extensive overview, because one of the questions I had was, how did we get to that surplus of 245 million? So I think you've answered that. So if you want to add anything in there, along with, what factors are contributing to the increase in the cost per eligible. So if you want to add anything in there, and then I've got one other question.
Madam Chair, Stacy Weeks for record. Thank you for that question. When we look at our cost per eligible, I'm actually a little concerned. We did the numbers this last week, and as we move through, so the big issue and really impacting our program, so we started about 900,000 people when I last sat here before you during session. We have started the unwind, like I mentioned. We have now, as of date, seen about 298,000 people roll off the program. Some of them may still come back, but we expect to be done with the unwind next month, thank goodness, so we can start to see what does it mean for our program. But we think at the end it could be close to 345,000 people. That's more than we, I think, ever anticipated, so it is a higher number than we had talked about with all of you. And when you think of, okay, if people are coming off the program, that should mean you're going to spend less. But unfortunately, that's not the case. When we look at the number of people, the people who did disenroll through the renewal process, almost half are non-utilizers. And what that means is they're not going to the doctor. They haven't had a claim in the last year. This means that they likely have employer coverage, and we just didn't know because we weren't doing renewals, right? And so what we're seeing is that risk pool, which was balanced with healthy non-utilizers and high utilizers, right? Some of our more costly members, we're seeing a smaller risk pool, and it's a higher risk pool. So we are seeing our caseload trends go up 20%, and just now that we've hit almost the last month of in this first state fiscal year, we look at the first month of the state fiscal year for 25, our trends are up 27.7%. That's very concerning because that's a lot of money when we look at it. I'm hopeful that once we get through the unwind, people will come back and we'll be where we thought we'd be, closer to 700,000, 800,000 people. But if not, we'll need to be updating you all and the governor and everyone as we move forward about the cost of our program. I would just note that we're anticipating, even though I know it looks like we do have a surplus in 2025. I just want to note that we need every dollar. We are looking at a 5 to 6% increase in our managed care rates. That's my actuary may get mad that I'm saying that out loud, but I need to be honest about that. That's about $20 million that we were not projecting based on our population. Fee-for-service is much more expensive. If you apply that trend rate, that 27.7 that we're seeing, we could see a general fund ask of $100 million more than what we're projecting. So I just want to be realistic with all of you today. The one thing I very much pride myself in is being a very good steward of public dollars. And the one thing I think that's the heart of our program is our budget. Sorry, I'm losing my voice, but I do think we're going to spend that money. I think we need to be very watchful of our budget and very mindful going forward. And that is one of the reasons I brought my deputy here with me today. We have a lot of new people in our budget, but we're very focused on watching these trends and making sure the state is prepared to understand the impact of the unwind on the cost of Medicaid. I'll stop there for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So you're saying we won't have a shortfall in 2025, or we will?
Madam Chair, Stacy Weeks for the record. So when you, if you approve the transfer today of $229 million, right now we were looking at a $45 million state fiscal year 25 hole because of these all the provider rate increases we're finally recycling. And also we just wanted to note we've lost about $11 million in federal funding because our FMAP went down. But if you transfer that money today, I'm left with about a $183 million surplus in 25. And what I'm saying is I think I'm going to need every penny of that to ensure that we have enough funding to pay for the increased costs that we're seeing for our program because of the unwind. And we're left with a sicker population, essentially, than in a smaller population.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Chair, for the time to ask questions.
Thank you. Senator Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for the numbers presentation. I need some clarification, though. Does the money roll over or revert at the end of the fiscal year?
Madam Chair, Stacy Weeks for the record. Senator Titus, that's a great question. So in this state fiscal year, we have the ability to roll it over. But at the end of the biennium, it would revert to the state general fund. And that's something with the managed care obligations that we have. We're looking at a reserve account to make sure that funding is not seen as a surplus.
Great, and thank you for that. And that's where I'm going to follow-up question, Madam Chair, if that's all right. You mentioned about, now I'm losing my voice. Anyway, you mentioned fee-for-service is expensive, but are we not eliminating all fee-for-service contracts? Are we not going to managed care everywhere?
Madam Chair, Stacy Weeks for the record. No, Senator Titus, we are only expanding managed care to adults without children, parents and children, and not our waiver population, our seniors, and some of our disabled population.
Perfect. And then I guess last thing along the same thing, if it's okay with you, Madam Chair, I'm curious, you mentioned this surplus. I'm alarmed about that, and I know that there's a lot of hurdles that you had to go through on the federal to spend this money, but you negotiate a new contract with the managed care organizations, and they're going to get more monies per enrollee, I understand. And I'm still not clear if that, you said they're sicker, but are people really getting the care? Did physicians get paid? Did providers get paid? Or, I'm concerned that there's this disconnect between the insurance providers, managed care people, and actually getting those monies to the providers that I continue to try to convince to take my Medicaid patients. And again, it's that delay in reimbursement. So we have this pot of funds sitting there, and it's really alarming that it's not going out to the providers. And maybe you need to clarify that. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Stacy Weeks for the record. Senator Titus, we always have that concern as well, but I will tell you that we received $20 million back. That's just state general fund. There's actually a lot more of that was federal share as well. Funding back from the MCOs for the stuff that was not getting spent out. So that's how we capture it each year. But I can't speak to the procurement at this point because we're about to go for our next procurement, but we're looking at solutions to the very problems that you're talking about to improve that for providers.
Thank you. It's going to be an ongoing conversation. So thank you for that. And thank you, Madam Chair, for the questions.
Thank you. Senator Neal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I had two questions. The first one was on the non-utilizer information that you brought up. How do you distinguish between what you're assuming is a person that has private coverage and individuals who are just not going to the doctor, such as like you have young adults who are without children who are just not frequenting, but they're on Medicaid, but they still do need it. How do you try to figure out what's what?
Madam Chair, Stacy Weeks for the record. Senator Neal, in this case, these individuals were ineligible for that very reason. Either they had a higher income and they were no longer eligible, or they got a job and had employer coverage. And one of the things we were worried about is procedural disenrollments, right? So some people were not able to get their paperwork back in. And so we've been working closely with our sister Division of Welfare Supportive Services, who leads this effort, and making sure those folks get back on. But 44% had not seen a visit in the last year, and many of those have not come back on. And obviously, like I mentioned, one of the big reasons people were disenrolled was because over COVID, they got a job, they got a raise, they had other forms of insurance. We look at third-party liability. We have to track that. So we're the payer of last resort. You probably have heard that before. Medicaid is. And so on our end, we could see that 30% of these individuals had a third-party liability. So a good portion of these folks were folks that had obviously had other coverage.
Madam Chair, follow up for my second question.
Go ahead.
So the second question was when you mentioned that the FMAP went down, and I know folks were rolled off when you guys did the renewal, but there are folks that still actually need to be on Medicaid. And this popped up because I sent some folks over to the office who, they were taken out of the system and then they needed care, right? Because they had multiple issues. And then they didn't know that, that COVID bump happened and then they were no longer eligible for Medicaid. And so I'm still trying to figure out what is our plan to, I guess, mitigate that, because even after I think the first call that I sent over, then I sent over a second call, and other folks that were still having like multiple complications and then are in this kind of weird spot where they're not eligible, but they still need some of that Medicaid coverage because of the multiple complications.
Madam Chair, Stacey Weeks for the record. Okay, so I think I hear a couple questions in there. So we are working very hard in every Medicaid program nationwide. CMS has been really pushing us to make sure anyone who is disenrolled due to procedural reasons is back on. Children also have continuous eligibility, so they're staying on no matter what. But I would just say that's been a big focus. I don't want to speak on behalf of Administrator Robert Thompson at DWIS, but I know that we've been working in partnership with them. That's why I said I think we need 6 months after September to really see who comes back on. Anyone can come back on if they're eligible. They just need to resubmit and say, hey, there's been a mistake. I was out of town or I missed my paperwork. But we are doing a lot of outreach, and so is DWIS, as well as the exchange. We've been working closely with Nevada Health Link. They're doing outreach. So I do think there is a lot of movement in that area. The piece about where you're talking about someone maybe their income is too high for Medicaid, unfortunately, we can't do anything about that. But I think when you're talking about someone who has complex needs, like, for example, a disability, they can try to enroll and do the disability door. The only issue with the disability door in Medicaid is they have to really, truly impoverish themselves at a level that is, 70%, I want to say. I'm sorry, I don't know exactly, but I know it's not very high. It's under 100% of poverty. But that is an option for folks who need Medicaid for disability and other services, is to go through the disability door to get Medicaid.
So thank you for that. So if you're working on that procedural disenrollment, if you have any kind of, I don't know, if you're doing some kind of social media marketing or graphic or something that you would like to share, I would definitely like to put that in the space in my district to see who is, potentially being knocked out on that procedural side, to try to move them either into re-enrollment, because I think a lot of people don't understand. And typically what happens is you don't understand and then you just blame the government and say, they took my insurance away, right? And so however I can be on the front end trying to use what I do in my own district to try to move the needle, please share via email any of those marketing tools that you have. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Weeks, I didn't realize that there was a loss of 11 million from the changes from the feds for the FMAP. But if we look at the general funds that were approved, and if we were to move the 230 million that you're asking from FY24 to FY25, there's an anticipated shortfall of 46.5 million. That still leaves a surplus of 103 plus million, but you're not sure if you're going to use it. You might use it. Is there a way you could work with our staff to determine how much would be a better number to move over? That's a lot of money to move over and just have sitting. I totally hear that folks can come back on and we need to have that money there so you can utilize it. But is there a way to work with our staff to see what that better number is that we need to transfer over, and what should be reverted?
Madam Chair, Stacey Weeks for the record. I'm happy to work with your staff. We have been working with your staff. Okay. I would just say I need every dollar. I'm concerned when we ran that 27.7% increase on the current enrollment. It's $150 million that we have not accounted for, plus all the provider rates that we haven't been able to recycle. I'm happy to keep them, John Kucera and your staff, updated on where we are over the 6 months, but I'm concerned about a budget hole if we don't get the full amount of money.
Thank you, and I totally appreciate that comment. So yes, if you could just continue working with them. I don't want to put you in a bind in any way, shape, form, or fashion moving forward, that you have the resources that you need to do your job. But having those conversations so we know where we are would be great. Members, any other questions? All right, not seeing any. Then I will move for approval of H8, M46, M47, M48, and M50.
Madam Chair, I'm so moved.
Second?
Members, any discussions on the motion? Not seeing any, then the motion is approved. And I thank you so much for the work that you have been doing with our staff and the continued conversations as we go through this fiscal year. And
Do you have to ask for the vote?
yeah, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I didn't think there would be. All right, motion carries. Members, we're going to work for another hour. We'll take our lunch break at noon. So the next item on our agenda will be item I and K. And we'll hear that with M80 and M89. Good morning.
Good morning, and Chair Monroe Morano and members of the Interim Finance Committee. My name is James Zarenda, D-Z-U-R-E-N-D-A, the Director for the Nevada Department of Corrections. And we're here today requesting SCAP, which is State Criminal Alien Assistance Program funds for reallocation. This request is part of Section 7 exemption. The NDOC is requesting $433,502 in budgetary transfer to fund projected shortfall within the department, category 50, Cat 50 at High Desert State Prison. $894,374 in incurred costs for HVAC, emergency repairs at multiple facilities, and the remaining funds from this project, from this request, would be reverted back to the general fund. When you're talking about the first one on part of K, the transfer of the $459,307, that was the emergency ARPA funds that we utilized to cover 7 different food budget accounts when we found out we didn't have enough to cover food costs for March, April, and May of 24. And we did that because we were worried that we were going to be shut off from any deliveries from the food service provider. That did not cover any of the costs that were falling under the food costs at the High Desert State Prison under Category 50. So that's what the request is for. We think, well, we're pretty certain, good estimate that we have June covered of fiscal year 24 for the bills for the food services, because what we ended up doing, we started denying a lot of requests unless they were emergencies for food services. We reduced our amount of food that came in, reduced it from even the 3 weeks that were required to have on stock. We reduced it under 10 days. We did not order emergency supplies that were needed, that we were able to reduce the cost. That's how we were able to pick up the cost that we think we have covered for June of fiscal year 24. Anyway, that's all I have, and I'm open for any questions you may have.
as you can imagine, we do have a few questions. Seems like that's been a part of the last few IFC meetings. We'll start the first question out with Speaker Yeager.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for being here and for your patience. I know it's been a long slog to get through this issue with the SCAP grant funds. I think you answered one of the questions, but I guess I'll just ask it to make sure we have it on the record. But my understanding is this $894,374, that represents fiscal year 2024 HVAC expenditures that you're trying to cover with that money. Did I get that right?
James Ryan, for the record, that is correct.
Okay, so thank you for confirming that. And then my question related to that is what steps either NDOC or the governor's finance office undertook to identify and confirm those amounts that were actually fiscal year 2024 HVAC expenditures. I know we had some back and forth with fiscal staff about what the money could be used for. So if you could just give us a little bit of your process of how you were able to determine that number and be here today with that request.
Thank you, Speaker Yeager. For the record, my name is Amy Stevenson. I serve as the Director for the Governor's Finance Office. Through you, Madam Chair, to Speaker Yeager. The process, I wish I could say it was a fancy smancy process. It really was archaic, and I had corrections give me the invoices that they incurred for the costs, and we checked off the invoice for each facility, and we totaled up those invoices, and that's the number that you have today.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just if we could confirm to make sure that we have the accurate number, the number for the fiscal year 2024 HVAC expenditures is $894,374. Is that correct?
James Ryan, for the record, that is correct.
Okay, thank you for confirming that. And Madam Chair, I don't think I have any additional questions on this particular item.
Members, any other question? Not seeing any here in Las Vegas and not seeing anyone raise their hand in Carson City. So with that, I'll accept a motion. Senator Dunbar-Whoop.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So I would move that based on the work program revision for agenda item M80, that we approve a revision to agenda item I for an exemption to Section 7 of Senate Bill 504 for $1,327,876, which includes $433,502 for budgetary transfers and $894,374 for deferred HVAC maintenance expenditures incurred in fiscal year 2024, and approve a revision to the work program in agenda item M80 to include $894,374 for deferred HVAC maintenance expenditures in a special use category and $847,124 in a reserve for reversion expenditure category. And approve agenda item M89 as is.
Madam Chair, I'd second that.
Thank you. Members, we have a motion and a second. Any questions? Not seeing any. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Then the motion carries. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you all.
Moving on to list M. We will hear items 9 and 10 together. It is the Office of the State Treasurer. Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair and committee members. Danielle Anthony, Anthony, Deputy Treasurer for Unclaimed Property for the record. I'm here to speak on behalf of item 10. Item 9, I will defer to, to Director Stevenson on, but for unclaimed property takes custody of abandoned funds and other certain types of property owed to Nevadans and holds those funds in perpetuity or until the funds are paid through our claims process. The division relies upon our software for our work. This work program requests additional funds for our new software. We changed this software as a result of issues that we were having. And we switched to this software because there are only 3 softwares out there for unclaimed property. The one that we were on, the one that we switched to, and one that only caters to programs in departments of taxation. So with that, I will go ahead and answer any questions you guys might have.
Could we go ahead and go through M9 as well before we go to the questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think because I think I'm here to support in answering questions for M10. So I don't believe that the treasurer's, I know he had an emergency and he can't be here, but I can help answer any questions for M9, but I don't necessarily have a presentation. So I apologize for that. I think I'm here in support for M10.
Thank you so much for that. Then we will proceed to the questions for M10. And I will go to Assemblywoman Hadi for that.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the questions. And my questions were only on M10, so this works out for me. I just had a couple questions. There's a process. Usually all requests have to come through the legislature, through the Interim Finance Committee when we're not in a legislative session, but this didn't. And so I'd like to know why this didn't come before IFC for approval before the purchase and entering into a contract happened.
Thank you through you, Madam Chair, to Assemblywoman Hodegay. I'm not sure why they purchased it. I can't answer for the Treasurer's Office. I can tell you that the Governor's Finance Office approved and BOE approved the contract based on information that we had at the time that the Treasurer's Office presented it to us, that they had authority for the parts that we understood that were going to happen with the contract. So I'm not sure why they didn't go ahead prior to this date. We have been working with them. I don't know if there's a misunderstanding on how the costs are going to be incurred between my office and them. So we're working really closely with them to make sure that they understand. I don't know if it's a training issue. They have new fiscal staff as well, as most of our state agencies do. So we will work with them to make sure that they ask for the money before completing the work, because that is the process to come before this body to get the money before doing the work.
So you mentioned you are working with their office to ensure that they know the steps. So there is steps being taken so that there's a request before IFC before a purchase is made or a contract entered.
Yes, ma'am. For the record, Amy Stevenson, Director for Governor's Finance Office. Through you, Madam Chair, to Assemblywoman Hodge. Yes, there are steps being taken.
And can either of you give us details on the ongoing cost of the new unclaimed property management system, including the per transaction vendor costs and the factors that may increase over time?
So I don't, sorry, Danielle Anthony for the record. The funds for the costs of the contract, there are certain fixed costs that are, like the software costs, the data storage costs, things of that nature that are, and I don't have the exact figures in front of me. And then there are certain that are volume based. So claims, how many claims that we receive will influence those figures. And that is also kind of broken out in the contract, which I don't have in front of me. So my apologies.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And then maybe if we could just have the Treasurer's Office send us the information to the entire committee, the cost. No, that was it for my questions, Madam Chair. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the questions. And yes, if you could send those numbers over to us. I understand that we have a lot of turnover in the state and a lot of new employees in all our departments and divisions. But this one, the practice, and if you didn't know it, you go to the BOE, get permission from the BOE to have a contract, but then you have to come to the legislative body to get approval for the money to pay for the contract before the work is actually done. We cannot do the work without having the money to pay for it. And you can't come to us and say, oh, I'm sorry, I need forgiveness. I understand that new employees, I understand mistakes happen. This can never happen again. Okay. We have a bill, we have to pay it, and we are going to honor that. But I would really like to know from the Treasurer's Office, along with those numbers, what the procedures are that are going to be put in place so that this never happens again, so that we as a legislative body are never in this position again, and that your office is not in this position again moving forward, okay? Because we do not have the information that we need for M9, I am going to ask for a motion to not approve M9 at this time. That can come back at our next IFC meeting. Any other discussion on M10 from members? Not seeing any. We're denying. Next meeting. Not seeing any. I'll accept a motion to approve.
Madam Chair, so moved.
Second.
We have a motion to approve M9. And as I stated, we are going to not approve approve M10, not approve M9 at this time because we do not have the information we need to approve that. Any discussion on the two motions? Not seeing any. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. Thank you both. And members, in my haste to get to lunch because I did not have breakfast, I skipped J. Please forgive me. We will go back to item J. It's the American Rescue Plan Act, and I'll invite Mr. Leiser to present the COVID response. I believe you are up north. And he'll be followed by Stevenson, our GFO on J. You might as well just stay at the table.
Yeah. Thank you, Chairman Moreno, members of the Interim Finance Committee. For the record, my name is Brody Leiser with the Fiscal Analysis Division of the Legislative Council Bureau. I will walk through agenda item J1, the Statement of American Rescue Plan Act, Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Fund, obligations and remaining unobligated balance. This table has been provided as a separate handout outside of the meeting packets. Members should have a hard copy, and it is also available on the committee meeting webpage, listed under Meeting Material, Agenda Item J1. There's not a whole lot of change or updates since the July meeting, but as consistent with how we've presented the statement previously. The top of page 1, there is a high-level summary displaying expenditures for fiscal years 22 and 23. The amounts currently authorized would include any requests before the committee today, and the remaining unobligated balance. The statement continues to show that all coronavirus state fiscal recovery fund authority is currently allocated as presented during the July meeting of the Interim Finance Committee. The table generally lists program descriptions and amounts in chronological order based on the budgetary approval date. As with prior practice, any revisions or updates to existing rows on the table following the July IFC meeting are identified in red text. These updates mainly account for the savings deobligations that were approved at the July meeting of the Interim Finance Committee. Following the July Interim Finance Committee meeting, the Governor's Finance Office did approve one new allocation of funding. This is to supplement funding for the Division of Internal Audits for support of an auditor position in fiscal year 2025. The associated work program did not meet the thresholds that required consideration by the Interim Finance Committee, and so that has been approved and is reflected on row number 282, which is on page 25 of the table. There are two items submitted for consideration by the committee today under Agenda Item L, and those have already been approved with the consent approval earlier on in the meeting. Those are also on page 25 of the table document. Both requests were to transfer authority between expenditure categories for previously approved projects and would not increase or decrease overall project authority. And Madam Chair, that concludes my remarks for Agenda Item J1, and I would be happy to address any questions that members may have.
Thank you so much. Members, any questions? All right, not seeing any. Then Ms. Stevenson, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Leiser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, my name is Amy Stevenson, and I serve as the Director for the Governor's Finance Office. As Mr. Leiser indicated, everything has been allocated, and there hasn't been much change from the July IFC meeting. The one thing I would like to point out is the expenditures have been updated as of July 31st, 2024. So we have spent about 20% of the funds, and then we are projected to expend all of them by the 12/31/2026 funds. We also submitted the certification letter, report of obligations, and report of expenditures per AB 526 to the Senate and Assembly on July 31st. And then I stand for any questions you may have.
Members, this is only an informational. Do you have any questions? Members, this was only an informational, but do you have any questions for Ms. Stevenson? My mic went out halfway through.
Nicole, maybe.
Okay.
First of all, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Stevenson, for providing all of that to us. I guess this is more of a comment than it is a question. Obviously, we all have been working hard and trying to make sure that we get all of this money allocated and that it is spent. And I know there have been a lot of meetings where we've talked about money that was allocated that then is not being spent. And so I'm just very hopeful, and this is the comment, that I'm hopeful that as we have and are currently in a position where we have allocated those funds and thus will not see some of those monies move into into other places where we had intended to direct them should they not be allocated, that all of the agencies that are tasked with implementing programs or projects pursuant to those allocations actually do so, because I think there will be some very significant questions from this committee and from this legislature if we have programs or projects that are not utilizing these funds for what they have intended to be used for. So I just sort of hope that anybody who might be listening to this meeting in that position is truly putting forth the effort to make sure that that is done, so that we are not in a position months from now where we may have to hand back some money. And I just wanted to thank you for your work on that and for working through that with this committee. And of course, always to Mr. Leiser for providing us with amazing information and being really diligent about this from the get-go. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any other comments? All right. Not seeing any. Thank you so much for being here. You might be able to leave the table now, maybe. And now we will go back to M, and we'll go to M12, the Department of Administrative Services Division. Good morning.
Good morning. Daniel Marlowe, Administrator for Administrative Services Division, Department of Administration. This work program, item 12 on the agenda, requests a transfer from the reserve category to the operating category to fund a new agreement to provide rate development and consulting and calculation support. I will note this agreement with Maximus was approved by the Board of Examiners on Tuesday, contingent on approval of this work program today at IFC. I'm here to answer any questions that you may have.
We do have a few questions, and we're going to go to Senator Neal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could you please explain the challenges with the existing cost of service and billable rate for the development process?
Certainly, Daniel Marlowe for the record. I will note it's often kind of not discussed in a lot of our discussions on the billable services. This is a core component of SWICAP, which is the statewide cost allocation plan that is reported to the U.S. Health and Human Services, their cost allocation services division. Essentially, the goal of that process is to maximize our cost share of services for centralized services. There's two sections of that. Section one is the general cost allocation. We have like the Treasurer's Office, Controller's Office, those offices that are funded with general fund. We allocate the use of those central services and collect that money back through anybody that's not funded through general fund. Section two is all the direct billed services. It provides a more timely collection of the used services, and that's really where all these rates come into play. Currently, ASD provides the primary support for the calculation and methodology of Section 2 rates. There are 19 different budget accounts that we calculate the direct billing rates for, which is, I believe, 40 different products within that. The primary concern is really regarding the methodology and expertise within the rate structure and methodology. They have largely not changed in over a decade. We've made two main changes in the last two legislative sessions. The other component is within my office. I have an Administrative Services Officer 4 who, amongst many of her duties, the rate calculation is one of them. It is primarily reliant on that one staff member to provide these rate calculations. As we go through the legislative process and the budget process, we have the agency request where we calculate initial rates for. And then as we go through and prepare for the governor's recommended budget, we have a time frame that we calculate then, and then at the end through the legislative process for legislatively approved rates. During all those times, it is very time limited and quick turnaround requirement as we're trying to make final decisions and shore up the rates. Currently, we use Excel workbooks. We have updated those through the years through more modern kind of formulas and functions. However, they are still manual and not really suited for this service. Usually it's within a day or two that we will get a request to update all of the information for all the rates and provide that timely to be able to input into NEBS, the Nevada Executive Budget System, or Basin, which LCB Fiscal uses, and that's all a quick turnaround, and it's relying on one person to make those changes. It is a manual process. We have to download the information. LCB Fiscal staff has to provide us the information transferred through email, and then we had to go manually update all those line items for how it's allocated out to the different rates. That is prone to mistakes with that process. And there's not that double check. With this service, Maximus has a proprietary software called MaxCaps that provides all that foundation and framework that also uses best practices to provide that rate support for us. Within that, they will provide two separate teams for this project. One will be the OCIO rates, that is a large portion of the direct billed rates, and then another team will be all the other rates that we provide. So it will be two separate teams of multiple people rather than relying on primary one person for that. Those are the primary challenges that we currently face.
Thank you for that. So I appreciate you just explained what appears to be a very complicated, I guess, rate process. So can you explain what do you anticipate to be the benefit of you utilizing a vendor right now for rate development for the executive budget for the 2025 session? Because my understanding that you're expecting this vendor to provide plans by December 20th of 2024.
Daniel Marlowe for the record. That is correct. We did engage this vendor as soon as a statewide agreement was put in place where we can request their services, and we are looking at targeting this fiscal year, this legislative session. There's two aspects to that. First is that rate calculation to manage that support under existing methodology. So they would take our current structure, our current rate methodology, and essentially replicate that to be able to meet the initial timeframes. The timeframes that we provided Maximus were based on the last 2 or 3 sessions on when those final rates were necessary. The second part, which is really the larger part, we will be engaging within 2-ish weeks of approval of this work program with Maximus. This will include them coming on site to review and discuss with all the different agencies that we support as Administrative Services Division, their current methodology, their time tracking methods, their current services, and really look at the products that we have rates for. Are those appropriate products that equitably distribute the cost to the different using agencies? And the other aspect of that is to provide expertise, advice on the methodologies, the modernization, and the best practices. They provide SWICAP support for, I believe, 20 different states. I will note that part of this, we are currently going through the negotiation process for the governor's finance office for Maximus to take over the SWICAP calculation and reporting. So with this, we will have kind of a unified front on the actual reporting and the Section 2 calculation part. So the timing of this provides those rate calculations, and ideally we will have some. I don't believe we'll be able to get all of recommended rate methodology changes this session because of timing, but also we might not have the information available. Perhaps we need to go to direct time cost tracking of what service we provide, and we might not have that currently. So we'll need to go through fiscal years 26 and 27 to collect that information, and then those modernizations and methodology changes would be at the next legislative session. So it is kind of twofold within there, but we are committed with Maximus to be able to provide this legislative session rate calculations for agency request, the governor's recommended budget, and legislative approved budget.
Thank you for that. So I have, your commentary actually created another question before I got to the final question. So in your statement, you were saying that the vendor may not be able to get to all of the rate calculations, but you're going to, because this is what I'm not clear on. So you're going to start with 19 rates? I'm confused. How many are you going to start with in this plan to try to get the vendor's recommendations in the governor's GovRec budget?
Daniel Marlowe for the record. The rate calculations will be completed by the vendor for agency request, governor's recommend budget, and legislatively approved budget. The recommendation for changes in rate methodology will be dependent on the time and complexity if those methodology changes will be incorporated in this budget build or the next budget build.
Okay. I guess I'm not processing this appropriately. So if the methodology is going to change, but you're going to get a rate calculation, wouldn't a methodology change actually change the rate amount?
Daniel Marlowe for the record. Correct, if that methodology is changing, but they will essentially replicate our current methodology and our current calculations first and foremost, so that we have existing rates to be able to provide during this session. It's if the rates need to or should change, that will be the kind of flexible part. So we will have existing methodology rate calculations provided by Maximus.
Okay, so Madam Chair, I'm sorry, but I have to ask this one more question. Okay, so you're going to take the existing rates, but sometime after the 25 session or during the 25 session, they're going to do some methodology adjustments, which would probably increase the rate. But your goal is to try to get some of these rates placed into the budget. Are you expecting somewhere between 25 and 27 in the biennium to magically come up with the additional rate change that may be increases? It seems like this probably shouldn't be happening now because you know the rate's going to change. So why are you trying to bake in an existing rate when you also have them doing the second activity of a methodology adjustment, which is probably going to change what the rate is that you're trying to bake into the budget? Like, that doesn't make sense to me. And I don't know if I'm just not processing what you're saying, or you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not trying to be rude, but I don't get why you're trying to do this now.
Daniel Marlowe for the record. I will note that through the rate process, the rates change daily. And that's really where that time crunch at the final step is where no more changes are made and we determine what that final rate is. So they're constantly changing. And with a rate methodology change, that doesn't necessarily mean that the rate will go up or down. It might change so that it's more equitable of who's paying by who's using the source. But it might not, well, it will not cost more overall. Because how we build the rates is slightly a little backwards than how we build budgets in general, is that we start with the expenses and the rates are divided by the utilization, who's using that, and that's the rate at the end. So when those expenses are approved, that rate, the division is going to be the same. It's who the payers are and what's the most equitable distribution of that is what might adjust with a methodology change.
Okay. So this leads me to my final question, and it kind of has two parts because you just said that the costs will not change overall, right? Even though there's going to be this up or down. So it sounds like you're somehow hedging your bets and your cost here of what could be your swing in the rate or the amount that this is all going to cost. I don't really see that in the backup, but maybe it's there. So answer me this. So when you bring this vendor on and they're doing this work before the session starts, what is going to be the availability of the vendor to support the rate calculations for the development of the legislatively approved budget? So what's their timeline to keep working with you after December 20th, 2024, throughout 25 and 26, while these methodology calculations are being adjusted?
Daniel Marlowe for the record. So during the legislative session, the vendor will be available to run and provide those final rate calculations for the legislatively approved budget for LCB fiscal staff. That is part of the agreement as written. There's a lot of work in terms of kind of site walks, looking at existing data. That is where that timeline changes. This vendor contract provides support throughout the entire biennium through the 30th of June 2027 to provide support, answering questions, any backup information as needed as arise for any of the rate information. We receive questions, I would say, at least a couple times a month on why is my rate this amount? So we always provide that support. We will still be the primary in that, but we will have Maximus throughout the entire 2025-2027 biennium to provide that support with us.
Madam Chair, can I just one final question and then I'm done. How quickly is this vendor going to turn around, these data calculations that legislative staff will ask for in session? So this isn't your first session. We'll have a hearing. It will be in some subcommittee, ask you a question, and then either you will have the response, oh, the vendor hasn't given me that information yet. I'd like to follow up and give this back. What is the timeline on this vendor producing this information in a way so not only is it effective and efficient, but provides an ability for legislative fiscal staff to not only give some certainty to the numbers that you're going to be playing around with during session?
Daniel Marlowe for the record. That is part of the commitment within the contract. again, currently we have one person that provides that calculation and that support. Having two teams of multiple people is going to be definitely faster with that. There isn't a specific time frame noted in the contract. However, that is a core component and a core piece of the deliverable. This is not a time and material contract. It is a deliverable contract.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We have a few more questions. I'm going to go to Assemblywoman Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. My questions are along the same lines as the Senator's questions. I'm looking over the background document, in particular the what is it, 50-ish pages from the Maximus that was given to us on the statewide cost allocation. It has to do with the plan from June 21st, 2024. The first thing that I kind of stands out for me, this feels like outsourcing. Will this be taking away any state of Nevada employees' jobs?
Daniel Marlowe for the record, this will not reduce our FTE. It will not replace anybody's job. This is the expertise in the rate calculation. There is nearly daily interaction with rates in terms of, are the rates actually performing how we anticipated? Are we billing enough to cover our expenses? Do we need to look at a mid-biennium rate increase? Do we need to look at a rate holiday? What is our accounts receivable? All those aspects are still part of the administrative services officer's role, and this will not replace any of that.
Follow-up, Chair?
Go ahead.
Thank you so much. So thank you for that clarification. So when I look on page 30 of that same memo, it says at the conclusion of this task, we will meet with management and confirm that our findings are complete and accurate. And then a little bit later in another, on page 38, it says Maximus will have a meeting to take possession of the agency data. Does that mean then that Maximus would be able to make the necessary changes if there is a rate increase or one-day decrease? Wouldn't that be nice? As well as the cost of service and billable rates? Or is this still under the control of the legislature and our staff to be able to make those recommendations?
Daniel Marlowe for the record. Essentially, the process does not change. Administrative Services Division works very closely with the Governor's Finance Office and LCB fiscal staff on calculating, discussing those rates. It depends on the timing of when it is. Depending on the NRS for the different divisions, that points to the administrator or executive director of that division or office to provide that rate. Anytime that we have had a mid-biennium increase or a rate holiday, we have had extensive discussions with the Governor's Finance Office and LCB fiscal staff, and that will not change. We are committed to working cohesively with our partners, and all of those decisions are not made in a vacuum.
Thank you for that clarification. And my last question, I promise, as I appreciate that, but I'm going to go back to exactly what the Senator brought up as well. Why at this time is this being presented? When there are other things that are coming up during this next legislative session that will take a large amount of time. Can this actually be done during the time frame that is projected both in the document and then also during this discussion today?
Daniel Marlowe for the record. Yes, it can be done in this time frame. We have had those discussions. This timeline has been discussed with the vendor, and again, it supplements what Admin Services Division presently does with that additional support, with that rate calculation for that process. The timing is to be able to include it with this legislative session to really modernize our process, our rate methodology, and the best practices. I'll give you an example. Currently, with our rate process, we have multiple internal service funds that essentially receive services from each other, Admin Services Division and Buildings and Grounds. Essentially, we charge each other for that service. Presently, we essentially pick a loser in that game and say, okay, we're freezing these rates, and then we're spreading ASD rates between the pairs. That's not necessarily equitable and accurate. With Maximus, they have within their software a double step down where they can be able to account for that double allocation, if you will. There is potential federal risks of payback within the rate methodology. They haven't changed in 10 years, although I'm fairly confident that there's been changes within CFR during that time. We don't have the capacity to be experts on that process, and that's really where the ability of Maximus comes in to be able to provide that guidance and that best practice. We did have, I believe in 2015, a risk of payback to the federal government for overcollection of services. Our SWICAP has not been approved by the U.S. Health and Human Services since the 19 SWICAP 2017 actuals. So there is a risk that when they do catch up with those, and we've been using unallowable costs or methodologies that are no longer appropriate or equitable, we have a risk of paying back the federal share of that money. Usually that's kind of starting point, at least 20%. So a large part of that is that expertise and the risk mitigation.
I remain skeptical, but thank you, Chair, for the amount of questions.
Thank you. Assemblywoman Bacchus.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And thank you, Mr. Marlowe, for your presentation. But I do want to dive into the cost of this system and kind of the timing of the rollout. So first, in response to my colleague, you made it clear that we're maintaining the current employee who's going to be doing the calculation in anticipation of rolling out the governor's next biennium budget. Is that a correct statement?
Daniel Marlowe, for the record, we are maintaining that employee. I will note that presently she is working 90-ish% over at Core NV to help stand that project up. But Maximus will be providing the calculation for the governor's recommended budget.
But before we get there, because we still need to approve that, I wanted to look at the cost of this. So we currently have an individual who is able to do the mathematics, get this done in time for the governor's budget. My experience, and we've had a lot of different technological issues, I guess I could call it, with the state, where we want to do a new software and it never gets done on time. I'm going to say probably of all the testimony I heard, maybe 10% on time within budget. We're running really close to the deadlines for the new budget getting implemented. But I wanted to really understand the cost that you're asking the state to cover with this new proposal. I see that the ask today is for the $256,811, but looking at the backup materials under tab D of the contract for cost proposal, I see hourly rates cost with travel, and then also hourly rates cost with no travel. And those figures are a lot higher than the 256. So is this going to be additional monies that we are going to be incurring after the 256? I'm just kind of understanding what the state's financial obligation is going to be going forward.
Certainly, Daniel Marlowe, for the record. So the 256,000 is for tab B on that cost schedule. That's the rate calculation and the rate methodology expertise and deep dive. Tab A is the SWICAP preparation, and that's the section that I mentioned earlier that the Governor's Finance Office is in process of contracting with to provide that that calculation and support. We currently have we had a vendor to provide that service. They're currently not under contract, and we have not calculated the fiscal year 23 actuals SWICAP. So that portion, the tab A portion, will be in budget account 1340, the Governor's Finance Office, which they currently have funding for a vendor to provide that support.
Okay, so my question, I guess, is what's going to be our cost obligation going forward? Because I'm looking at tab D. And from hearing all the testimony today, I'm hearing we have one employee who's doing all of the calculations, but now we're going to have a team of individuals under a vendor who's going to be hired to put together this software and keep inputting data. And it just concerns me how much more money we're going to be spending as a state to calculate the spread of costs amongst our agency out of the Department of Administration. So I'm trying to get to understand what is our ongoing cost that we're going to be incurring. Is that under tab D, the 340,000 fix, the 260? I'm just trying to understand that.
Daniel Marlowe for the record. So the ongoing costs will be in two different sections. One will be the SWICAP calculation. That's that tab A amounts under the Governor's Finance Office, and that will be roughly $62,000 for that portion. The $256,000 is not just that calculation; it's the deep dive into our current methodology and providing that guidance. That's not going to be a continual. Every biennium, we need to review all those aspects, those rates, that methodology. Once that's set, then that amount will decrease to where it's just the calculation portion. I don't have a number for that because it depends on a number of different aspects. If we're increasing the number of rates or the number of products, or if we're decreasing those and consolidating to be more efficient in that methodology, and the complexity of that can change. But I would, it's definitely going to be less than the 256,000. That includes travel, so that they can come out and visit the 19 different budget accounts, meet with staff, learn the operations, learn the process. So it would be, I would guess, roughly around 100,000 or so from my conversations, but that's a little unknown until we have more information.
Madam Chair, I think I just have a comment. I mean, this seems like a lot that's going on for something that probably won't likely get completed in time to get to the governor's budget. We're also going to have the simultaneous calculation. I just think it's a lot of other costs to incur in running that gamble of not having it done timely. And that's just kind of what I'm going to say from what I heard today. Thank you so much, Mr. Marlowe, though, for your presentation.
Thank you. Members, any other questions? Not seeing any questions from anyone here in Las Vegas. Is there any members in Carson City that have any questions?
No.
Not hearing any. Thank you. Oh, you've heard the conversation, the dialogue, and the hesitation from members of this body on this agenda item. In my career in the legislature, when it comes to things that have to do with IT software, those projects take much longer than we had anticipated that they would, and they come in at a much higher cost. I share the concerns of the members of this committee. We are coming up on getting the governor's budget ready for the next legislative session. I believe from the comments that I'm hearing from the few members on this committee, this needs a larger conversation, and that conversation should happen during our legislative process. But at this time, to make this change right now, so close to as we're getting a budget ready to get ready for the next legislative session, I just do not believe that this is the right time to do this. So not seeing any other comments or questions from members, I will accept a motion to not approve this item as presented today.
Madam Chair, so moved.
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? I see Senator Titus and Senator Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I guess I have a concern that we won't be prepared for the legislative session with having the appropriate rates. And it sounded like there was risk associated with not making sure that our rates are accurate, especially from when we get a match from the federal government, which we know is about 2/3. It's about a 1/3, 2/3 match. So I'm not going to support this motion because I think we should allow them, and I think they've got some experience with Maximus too. This isn't brand new, so I think we should allow them to get the software that they need. There was also mentioned that the individual who they spoke about was actually assigned 90% on another project, so she currently isn't working on this right now. So I think this puts them in a very difficult situation to prepare the budget. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Senator Titus, did you have a comment?
I'll chime in, Madam Chair. We're talking about $100,000 and being prepared for a budget. It does concern me as well.
Yes, and thank you, Madam Chair. I just support both my colleagues' comments. Thank you.
Thank you. We are talking about $100,000 right now to get prepared for a budget in a process that we have used for many years in this state to get prepared for the legislative session. So we're not saying we're doing anything different than we have done. This may improve it, it might, and I agree with that. But I think at this point and in the budgeting process, this is something that should have been brought to us earlier. And so if that person is on core NV and there's a need for that person to come back to this department to do the budget, then that's what needs to happen so that we're ready for the legislative session. That's my views. We have a motion. We have a second. Any other discussion on it? Not seeing any. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, please raise your hand.
Nay.
Nay.
So those that are a nay, we have Assemblyman Hafen, Assemblyman Tibbetts, Assemblyman O'Neill, Assemblywoman, Dickman, and Senator Titus, Senator Ganser, and Senator Gokachia. The motion does pass. Moving on to the next item on our agenda will be M28, and we will hear M28 with M42 and M81. And that is the Department of Health and Human Resources Director's Office. Good. Oh, it's now afternoon by 1 minute. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Richard Whitley, and I serve as the Director for the Department of Health and Human Services. I'm here today asking for a transfer of $13.2 million from the reserve category to allocation in order to support programs resulting from a notice of funding opportunity solicitation that closed on July 26th, and $400,000 from reserve category to support the statutorily required needs assessment and statewide plan update for opioid epidemic abatement. Also included are two companion work programs, transferring $200,000 to the Division of Healthcare Finance and Policy and transferring $337,363 to the Department of Corrections. I'd like to start by apologizing that for not providing a complete work program package that included the identified agencies to be funded. The service categories proposed to be funded are consistent with the state plan and the state priorities. At the time the work program was submitted, the solicitation for applications were in progress. The review and scoring has been completed in accordance with the state procurement and settlement requirements. The primary reason for submitting the work program while the applications were being scored and not waiting until October IFC relates to the urgency to address service gaps in the areas of perinatal substance abuse and the impact on children who are exposed. Again, the original plan was to come before October IFC. I pushed the timeline forward because of that urgency, and I'm happy to put on record the 31 projects selected, and here to answer any questions.
Thank you. We do have a few questions. We'll go to Assemblywoman Gorlow.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I kind of want to recap that during the legislative session, we had asked that you come before us when you had specified projects and specific projects, and you're coming with unspecific. So am I hearing correctly that you just feel like there's that urgency, especially when it comes to the newborns?
Correct. For the record, Richard Whitley. The solicitation actually uniquely this time targeted a population. The goals of the opioid funding remain consistent, but the target population was focused on perinatal substance abuse and early childhood. And just to say that of the 31 solicitations that were scored to be funded, 22 are focused on children and prenatal care. Yes, we did a deeper data dive on the impact of perinatal substance abuse in our state, and in 2020 we had approximately 29,000 births in our state, and nearly 12% of the children born were impacted by the mother using substances. We have a report on our website that actually is much more than a needs assessment. It shows the missed opportunity from prenatal care to early childhood of where interventions need to occur. The solicitations that were selected in the scoring process address various aspects of where those issues are. And the reason for that is the communities are all at different places. In northern Nevada, Washoe County, renowned when they were the county hospital, Washoe Med, they stood up a high-risk pregnancy center, which has now become a women's clinic focused on pregnancies that are high risk, that they take referrals from. They have a signed agreement with the 2 federally qualified health centers that they will take regardless of ability to pay referrals. It's a partnership with UNR School of Medicine. So they probably represent the most robust and systemic approach to high-risk pregnancies in our state. Carson Tahoe has a group of OBGYNs in partnership, and they are addressing because they care, and do outreach because they care. In Clark County, I struggle a bit to get a coalition working together. There's case management. There's certainly Sunrise and UMC receive the highest volume of these high-risk pregnancies that have dropped out of prenatal care. If you look on our report, which this is what was compelling to me, is when I saw our data that we pulled of our own state, of our own experience with pregnant women, it isn't women not getting prenatal care, it's women dropping out of prenatal care. That's a different intervention point than women just not coming into care. And so it's with that urgency that and I listened today about other agencies that came after the fact. I think I'm coming early, but I'm doing it, I believe, for the right reason. I totally own that I pushed the staff who are with me, who are busy doing budgets right now, to get these scored and to start early. I would also add that this body hears, you've heard with ARPA funding, a focus, like nearly $85 million, if you look in total, focused on child and adolescent support. And then you look at the last session, the hospital voluntary tax that the 15% that was earmarked for children's behavioral health to respond to the Department of Justice substantiated complaint. This is an added piece to that entire effort to systemically improve healthcare in our state, focused on children, focused on unborn children to have healthier deliveries. Perinatal impact is preventable. It has an urgency to it. We do the downstream part where we intervene all the way to court. I sat in Judge Bailey's court in Las Vegas, and it was a dual court for child welfare and juvenile justice. And there were actually children who had not been assessed for neurodevelopment issues related to perinatal substance use. And so you can see, you can't see, I tried to send this yesterday, but I missed the deadline for getting the awardees out. I'm happy to read them or to go over them. But I do believe that I'm responding to an urgent need in our state.
Mr. Whitley, I appreciate you coming to ask for permission, not ask for forgiveness. I totally appreciate it, and I hear what you're saying, but I believe as a body, we need to be consistent in our actions before approving this transfer. And we had asked for the documentation. If you do have it and you can verbally put it on the record, then we can go ahead and take your verbal submission.
Okay. Thank you. For the record, Richard Whitley. I need a bigger print, I think. So I'll read the agencies that actually were scored to be approved for funding in the categories that are required in the plan in the targeted areas. So in target area 1, which is building capacity, Carson Tahoe Health, Changing Smiles Pediatric Dentistry, Frontier Community Coalition, High Sierra, Join Together Northern Nevada, Story County, Tahoe Forest Health, UNLV Department of Psychology for the bachelor's degree program, and UNLV Department of Psychology for the PsyD program, UNR Renown for a Nevada Addiction Medicine Fellowship. In Category 2, Prevent the Misuse of Opioids, Carson City, Foster Kinship, Inspiring Children Foundation, Nye Community Coalition, PAC Coalition, and Washoe County. In Target Area 3, Reduce Harm Related to Opioid Use, China Springs Youth Camp, First Med Health and Wellness, Foundation for Recovery, Renown Women's Health Center. In the target area 4, provide behavioral health treatment. Ackerman Center, Apple Grove Foster Care, Boys and Girls Club of Southern Nevada, Carson City, Crossroads of Southern Nevada, United Citizens Foundation. In target area 5, implement recovery communities across Nevada, College of Southern Nevada, Nye County Community Coalitions. Target area 6, provide opioid prevention and treatment consistently across the criminal justice and public safety system, Carson City Community Counseling, and Life Change Center. Target area 7, provide quality and robust data and accessible timely reporting, UNLV. And that concludes the 31 projects. And I would just say again, of the 31, 22 are focused on youth and adolescents.
Thank you, Mr. Whitley, for giving that. Members, I am in receipt of an email that was sent over. Staff received it late last night with the targeted groups from 1 to 7. It has the names of the groups. It does not have, or the names of the organization, it does not have the percentages of what will go to each one of those organizations. Have you determined what percentage that they will receive as of yet, or is that something you're still working on?
For the record, Richard Whitley, we're still working on negotiation. I mean, one of the things is we want to maximize Medicaid. You know, we're venturing into the workforce side of things. You know, all these services that we're that we really are looking to fund, Medicaid is adding to their plan, require a workforce, and, you know, tackled one way through licensing boards, the other through creating the clinical types. And it's a new area for us to negotiate. The readiness of these programs that I identified at UNLV and UNR with the School of Medicine, I mean, they're at different stages of their own maturity, but what made them viable is they were putting in their own funding to support this, but needed additional funding to actually stand this up. I would point out that the UNLV psychology program, until engaged with the practice at UNLV, I did not realize in our state, both UNR and UNLV's PhD programs in psychology largely focus on research psychology. The need in our state, particularly with children and assessment, is clinical psychology. And so the readiness to stand up a PsyD program, I think, is critical for the workforce in our state and to be able to adequately assess. You know, if for disability services, that requires in the area of behavioral health a psychiatrist or a psychologist to do an assessment for Social Security disability, and we have to have an adequate workforce. And we don't have that much experience in our department in the realm of the university system, and making sure we get it right. Equally with these nonprofits, we want sustainability, so we want to make sure that they're able to. We don't want to subsidize Medicaid with these dollars. We want to maximize the entire network of healthcare. So that's my long answer to we really are negotiating the award amounts. With each nonprofit, we haven't commenced with it. I don't want to commence with something without having approval for the resource, especially with the university. These are delicate programs, really. The fellowship with addiction. I don't want to lead them along and then later come along so that and get or seek approval and not get it. Hence my coming early to try and get the approval, and happy to come back with the detail, but really thought it best to get approval before I started.
I totally agree with you, and I appreciate your process. Thank you for putting the list on the record. So it's what we had asked for, and you have done that. I will ask is that as you do the percentages, you work with our team and give them the follow-up of what those percentages will be that will go to each one of these organizations. But thank you for being ahead of the game. We all know that this is, I think, important to every member of this committee as much as it is to you and your team. Speaker Yeager, did you have a comment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to, thank Director Whitley. I think this is an issue folks are really struggling with out in our communities. We hear it every day when we talk to constituents. And so I appreciate your sense of urgency in being able to do this. You listed the 30, here's my question. You listed the 31 different, I guess we'll call them grantees or awardees. We don't know the numbers yet. You're still working on that. I understand that. But you talked a little bit about the universities, but could you just maybe highlight a couple of the applications and give us a sense of a couple of them that you're excited about, what kind of work they do in the community, how it's going to help folks who are struggling, just so we have a sense. Obviously, we'll get some of this information later on after the money is expended, but if you could give us maybe a couple that you're really excited about and you think are going to make a difference.
Sure. For the record, I think I do have two. I'll keep it limited to two. As I mentioned, I sat in Judge Bailey's court, and it was a dual court for juvenile justice and child welfare. So child was removed from their home for abuse or neglect in the child welfare system, and then got into trouble and was in the juvenile justice system. In hearing the cases that were being heard, two of the children had never had an assessment. And in meeting with the judge, she was in a position of making a life-determining decision about where this child would head, adult criminal justice or maybe service and treatment. If appropriately able to get assessed, we do not have adequate assessment capacity in our state for neurodevelopmental clinical. We have some capabilities at UNR. The most robust is Ackerman Center. So two of the projects, the UNLV PsyD program and the Ackerman, are essentially an opportunity for fellowship in neurodevelopmental clinical. What I'm impressed with them is they're open to both, the physician is open to both APRN and physician fellowships, as well as psychology. And so they've embraced all the disciplines, playing to maximize their scope of practice, which, is not always easy to get a single discipline to be open to other disciplines, overlaying with their scope of practice, even when there's not enough of them. So that's impressive to me, and it solves a problem that I witnessed firsthand. And then looked at the data to better identify that the sort of systemic challenges this represented. The other program that I think I was not knowledgeable about, but had heard about on public radio nationally, is this sort of unofficial sort of care. Well, it's not unofficial, it's real caring for children, but it's relatives who don't enter the system. We don't have a real sense, but probably everybody in this room knows a grandparent who's raising a grandchild because the child, the parent, has a substance abuse issue, maybe estranged from the family, but the kids have needs. And what happens is these parents, out of not knowing, or even out of pride of not wanting to apply for services that they're now eligible for, Kin Care does reach out and help them proactively, because you can only imagine that the child could be traumatized twice. The grandparent is caring for them, doing the best they can, but struggling. If services that are currently available aren't made aware of to this population, I mean, they risk caring as long as they can until perhaps child welfare even intervenes. And so there's not a good record of even how many. Probably the schools are the best proxy in terms of who's the guardian that can pick up the child. But it's for the right reason that relatives are caring for these kids, keeping them out of the child welfare system. But we need to do more in that area. And concurrently, we're trying to quantify it a little bit more. It's one area that I frankly, I'm looking in our budget to support with opioid funding so that we can more proactively help these families who are doing the right thing and caring for their relatives. So those are two programs that that specifically these funds could help, which could be system changing for our state.
Thank you. And members and those listening to this meeting, the list that Mr. Whitley presented is now uploaded on Nella's, so you have access to the list that he presented. Any other questions? Not seeing any. So with that, I will entertain a motion to approve. Senator Dondero-Luke.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I would move to approve the transfer of the $400,000 from the reserve category to Senate Bill 390 for the needs assessment category, and additionally approve the transfer of $13.2 million from the reserve category to the opioid allocation category, including $6.2 million for the identified projects and $7 million in unallocated authority for projects yet to be determined, with the provision of an updated spending plan following the identification of approved projects at a future meeting of the IOC.
And Madam Chair, I'd second that.
Thank you so much. We have a motion and a second. Any comments?
I have a comment.
I believe Senator Ganser. Go ahead.
Thank you. So I want to thank Director Whitley and his staff who've worked so diligently, and also Medicaid. So Ms. Weeks, because we have so many people who are at risk, and we have these dollars that are coming in, and sometimes we struggle to use the dollars once we get them. And it sounds like you've done an immense amount of research, and both staffs have done a lot of work to bring this forward. And so I'm grateful for that, and I'm very thankful to this committee that they're moving it forward at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any other comments? Not seeing any. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously. And Mr. Whitley, thank you, and please say thank you to your staff on the work they're doing. All right, that takes us to our next agenda item, which will be M108, the Department of Wildlife.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Alan Janae, Director, Nevada Department of Wildlife. We're here asking for a work program to fund the purchase of our Battle Mountain office. We've had an opportunity come forward to acquire an office that we've previous to now been leasing, and we're seeking this approval so that we can go forward and house these 4 employees in this location for a long-term period. I'll stand for any questions you may have.
Thank you so much. Members, any questions on this agenda item?
I do, Chair.
Assemblywoman Anderson.
Thank you. So thank you very much for bringing this forward. This is exciting news. Would this purchase impact any projected programs for the upcoming fiscal year? And/or would you also need to make any adjustments to your budget request for us to consider in the next budget year?
Thank you for the question. So looking at that is the program will support, or the purchase of this building will continue to support long-term programs that we have in that area. We've got game biologists, fisheries biologists, game wardens, and habitat biologists all located in this building. And so it'll just be that continuation of those programs, and it will not require any additional adjustment to the next upcoming budget.
Thank you so much for that clarification. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions here in Las Vegas. Are there any questions in Carson City? All right, I'm not seeing any. Then I'll accept a motion to approve.
Madam Chair, so moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Not seeing any. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Thank you so much.
We have NLPQ.
Members, I did say that we would break for lunch at noon. However, the lunch was delayed in getting here. And looking at our agenda, we're pretty close to the end. Does anyone have any objections of just working through to the end and you can pick up your lunch on the way out? Not seeing any objections here in Las Vegas. Are there any objections?
We are
in Carson
all
City?
good up
Just
here. We love that idea.
All right. All righty then. Then let's move on to item N, request for transfer from the Interim Finance Committee's account for foreclosure mediation assistance pursuant to NRS 107.080. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair. My name is Perry Fagan. I am the president for Home Means Nevada, Inc. And today I am here to request $48,267 from the account for foreclosure mediation to continue the funding and the operation of the program. And I'm here to answer any questions you might have.
Members, do you have any questions? Seeing none here in Las Vegas, do we have any questions in Carson City for the presenter? Not seeing any. All right, then I'll accept a motion to approve.
Madam Chair, so moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Not seeing any. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Moving on to our next agenda item. It's a status report on the Home Means Nevada initiative for affordable housing. We have the Department of Business and Industry.
Good morning, Chair. My name is Perry Fagan. I am the Deputy Director with Business and Industry. How are you today? And you're going to have to forgive me. Mr. Acroth is desperately trying to get here. However, he's not here this morning, and so I get to take his place, and I can tell you right now, I am definitely not going to do as good a job as he does. But I'll do my best. Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, and committee members. For the record, apologies for Steve and Christine not being here. They have been attending this morning the grand opening of the first project using Home Means Nevada funds to be occupied Dick Scott Manor by the Reno Housing Authority. This is truly a great day for affordable housing in the state of Nevada. Dick Scott Manor is a 12-unit permanent supportive housing building for low-income, extremely low-income, and/or homeless military veterans. You can see on the spreadsheets that you have, hopefully you all have those spreadsheets, that the project was awarded $1.6 million in Home Means Nevada funds. The project also received City of Reno fiscal recovery funds and land donated by the City of Reno. The Reno Housing Authority will provide rental subsidies to residents through project-based Veterans Affairs Supportive Housing vouchers with case management provided by the VA Sierra Nevada Healthcare System. Other supportive services will also be provided by RHA. And through the generous contributions from community partners, all the apartments will be furnished to the initial residents. This is a very momentous, because the projects like this rarely can be funded using Housing Division's traditional funding sources. So your past approval of the funding of this initiative now bear fruit, and we hope to provide reports like this more frequently in the future. As far as overall progress of the program, $119 million has been expended, representing 24% of the total funding, and 7 projects have completely expended their funding to date. And with that, I'm happy to entertain any questions that I may be able to answer. And if I'm not, I'll be sure to get back to you with those answers. And unfortunately, the pictures from this morning are not available because he's probably running up the stairs right now. Thank you.
Well, please tell him not to run. You did a great job in the presentation as a pitch hitter, and I'm sorry that we couldn't be there for the groundbreaking, but thank you for the report. Members, this is just an informational. Does anyone have any questions? Not seeing any here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We appreciate you. And members, that takes us to our next item on our agenda, which is also an informational only item. It's a public hearing required pursuant to NRS 428.375 to receive public comment on the proposed plan for the statewide use of the distribution of the money to be provided through the Community Service Block Grant Act. I believe we have the Department of Health and Human Services here for that informational. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Debbie Reynolds. I serve as the Deputy Director of Fiscal Services with the Department of Health and Human Services. Also with me today is Kelly Quintero, who serves as the Chief of our Grants Management Unit. We are here today to hold a public hearing to receive public comment on the proposed plan for the statewide use and distribution of money to be provided through the Community Services Block Grant for the federal fiscal year 2025 and federal fiscal year 2026. This is noted on page 4 of the CSBG State Plan, sections 1.1 and 1.1A. The Community Services Block Grant is a federally funded block grant program provided by the Office of Community Services, Administration for Children and Families, United States Department of Health and Human Services. The purpose of this funding is to support services that alleviate the causes and conditions of poverty in under-resourced communities. Funded services and activities include housing, nutrition, utility and transportation assistance, employment and other income and asset building services, crisis and emergency services, and community asset building initiatives. In Nevada, CSBG funds are awarded by the Department of Health and Human Services to eligible community action agencies that provide services to low-income individuals and families and to network with other local agencies to address poverty issues. The CSBG State Plan includes funding for 11 current community action agencies in Nevada, as well as the Nevada Community Action Association, which provides training and technical assistance to the community action agencies. On June 21st, 2024, the Department of Health and Human Services held a public hearing to receive public comment on the proposed plan pursuant to NRS 428.375 subsection 2. And today's public hearing is being held pursuant to NRS 428.375 subsection 3, as well as the Social Services Act Title 42, section 9908. Which requires at least one legislative hearing every 3 years in conjunction with the state plan. With that, we would like to welcome any public comments on the proposed state plan for federal fiscal year 25 and 26.
Thank you so much. If we have anyone here in Las Vegas that would like to make public comment, I invite you to the chairs here at the table. If there's anyone in Carson City that would like to make public comment, I invite you to the table there. I am not seeing anyone come to the table here in Las Vegas. Is there anyone? No. BPS, do we have anyone joining us on our phone line that would like to make public comment?
Thank you, Chair. To provide public comment, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Once again, to provide public comment, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, the public line is open and working. However, we have no public comment callers at this time.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the Department of Health and Human Services for being here today to conduct this legislative public hearing on the block grant. Seeing that we have no public comment here in Las Vegas or in Carson City, or members from the community join us via telephone to make public comment. Do any of the members have any comments before we move on? This is not an item we will be voting on. It was simply an informational. Are there any members who have any comments? Not seeing any here in Las Vegas, and not seeing any in Carson
We do
City.
have, oh, I'm sorry. After.
We go ahead.
I'm sorry,
Go
Madam
ahead.
Chair, I think you needed to close this item first. Did you?
I will. I will. I was asking if any of the members had any comments before I close the item. So seeing that there were no members up north that had any comments during this public comment period, we will close the public comment period on item B, on the public hearing. And therefore, it was an informational. I thank the Department of Health and Human Services for being here to conduct this legislative public hearing. And we can move on from item P on our agenda. The next item on our agenda is item Q. There were no items pulled from that list at the beginning of today's meeting, so we will move on to item R, which are work program revisions submitted in accordance to NRS 353.2205B.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. For the record, Timothy Galuzzi, State Chief Information Officer. Item R for your consideration is a work program for transfer of $221,313 to move from reserves to a general fund loan repayment category for the repayment of a general fund loan. This was missed during the previous budget build, and we are trying to correct that issue. I'll stand for any questions.
I didn't have any questions, it appears, but do you know how we missed it?
Madam Chair, Timothy Galuzzi for the record, I don't have that answer. This general fund loan repayment was stipulated in Senate Bill 426 from the 2021 session. It's went through the process during the last budget build, and I'm not sure how it came out of that process without being included in this unit's budget. So we're here today to rectify that situation. The current reserve is healthy enough to make this transfer, and we have already included this in our budget moving forward, so it will not be an issue.
Thank you so much. That was going to be my next question about your reserve, so thank you for answering that. Members, any questions? Not seeing any here in Las Vegas. Are there anyone with questions in Carson City? All right, not seeing any. Then I will accept a motion to approve.
Madam Chair, so moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? Not seeing any. All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? And the motion carries unanimously. Thank you so much for being here. And members, that brings us to the second session of opportunity for public comment at the end of today's agenda. If you'd like to make public comment, you'd like to
Madam
call
Chair.
in or. Yes.
Oh, Madam Chair, it's Senator Severs O'Gara. I just had to make a correction for the record. I had made several comments and then we took the votes and I have a new name. So I just wanted to make sure the record reflects through today, Senator Heidi Severs O'Gara. Thank you.
Thank you so much and congratulations.
Thank you.
I did not realize that. Thank you. Okay, so going back to public comment, if you'd like to call in for public comment, the number is 888-475-4499. Our meeting ID is 869-0753-1191, and then press pound. We'll start here in Las Vegas with public comment, then we'll go to Carson City, and then we'll go to our phone lines. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, and committee members. My name is Sabrina Schnurr, and I'm here on behalf of Foster Kinship. We wanted to thank Director Whitley for calling out Foster Kinship as a favorite organization. We agree. First, we would like to extend an invitation to all legislators to visit Foster Kinship and see the programs, resources, and staff. There are offices in Las Vegas and Reno. Foster Kinship has 3 ideas to help children and families in Nevada who are in or provide kinship care. First, if foster kinship is included in the state budget, the state can draw down the full 50% of Title IV-E match from the federal government. Second, NRS 422A.538 is for child-only TANF. We can strengthen this program by removing the child support requirement and/or by increasing the household means test, which is the level of income allowed to be eligible for this program. Finally, there's a need to monitor and document interactions between welfare staff and children ultimately placed in care outside the traditional foster care system. We would love to work with any and all of you to help support these Nevada families who are caring for children in a kinship setting with little to no help from the state currently. Thank you.
Thank you. Not seeing anyone else here in Las Vegas for public comment. Is there anyone at the table in Carson City that would like to make public comment?
There is not.
Thank you so much. BPS, do we have anyone joining us on the phone line that would like to make public comment at this time?
Thank you, Chair. To provide public comment, please press *9 now on your phone to take your place in the queue. Once again, to provide public comment, please press *9 to take your place in the queue. Chair, the public line is open and working, but we have no public commenters at this time.
Thank you so much. Well, the goal was to be out by at least 3, and we beat that, and we don't often do that. So members, thank you so much for being here. For everyone that joined the meeting today, thank you for participating in it. And this meeting is adjourned. I'll give you back a few hours of your day.
Thank you, Chair.